Hello everyone, I'm Richard, I'm with my friends Oscar and Rod, and today we are doing a commentary on the extended version of The Hobbit, Desolation of Smaug, directed by Peter Jackson.
Hello everyone.
Hello everyone.
And guys, as I understand it, this is pretty much the first time you're seeing this version.
I've seen clips of the extended edition on YouTube and really liked what I've seen, but this is the first time I'm watching it all the way from start to finish.
Oh, okay. And Rod, I think it's the same thing for you, more or less, isn't it?
It pretty much is, yeah. I haven't seen any of these extended clips on their own, and I certainly haven't seen them in this film, so it's going to be a great experience. I consider the extended editions the true editions. The theatricals of these movies I do enjoy when I go see them, but I'd rather have the extendeds in my collection.
Yeah, I feel pretty much the same way, because I think the clips, in some instances, are unnecessarily cut out. They don't need to be cut out, and a lot of them don't really affect the pacing, which is why I often get confused at those studio executive decisions.
I echo your sentiments completely, gentlemen. I also have to say, that Peter Jackson cameo a few seconds ago, that was quite cheeky and quite unsubtle, but I really liked it.
Yeah, it's similar to the one he has in Fellowship of the Ring.
In fact, it's almost identical, right down to the carrot in his hand.
Yeah, and the costume he was wearing as well.
And it's funny because in the Lego Lord of the Rings game, you actually do see a guy, and I'm pretty sure it is supposed to be him. He has a beard and dark hair, a dark beard and all that, and he's eating a carrot, and there's carrots around him, so...
I believe the girl who gives Thorin his food is actually Peter Jackson's daughter.
Oh, bless her.
That's correct.
So yes, the cameos run in the family.
And I like the fact that you see, like, hobbits drinking with the men of Bree.
Yes, Bree is... We're told in the books that Bree is actually a very hospitable place to both men and hobbits. And it was nice to see that mostly more welcoming side of the town.
Whereas, as time moves on, when Sauron's presence gets more felt by everyone, I think the Shire gets more cut off from the world, and the hobbits they venture a lot less out into the wider world.
That's a good point, actually. And one of the first indicators that something is wrong in the world are these two assassins who almost tried to kill Thorin.
Yeah, but then of course Gandalf steps in.
Yes. Always count on the wizards to save you from assassination.
Yeah.
Always arrives precisely when he means to.
as the old joke goes, yeah. And I just love the fact that we get this scene between two great actors, Richard Armitage and Ian McKellen.
Another great scene that I believe should have been included, and I'm sure you feel the same way as well, Richard, is depicting what happens to King Thrain during the battle between the dwarves and the orcs. Because he just appears.
I know he does. He just appears, and actually no, we don't find out what happens to him in the theatrical version, and I can't for the life of me figure out why this was cut out. And we're literally a few minutes into the film. I mean, people aren't going to start getting bored now, are they?
It's like the Saruman scene in Return of the King, but for this movie.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get to that one eventually.
But as this scene being in this, I don't mind it. And if it wasn't, in terms of this introduction at Bree, if this introduction at Bree wasn't in it, it wouldn't ruin the film for me, but it is nice, as you said, with the Thrain element to actually see that, and then it obviously gets paid off later instead of just being left out completely.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
I do feel that its placement in the Desolation of Smaug works because 5 out of 6 of the Middle-earth movies open with a prologue of some sort. And this scene gives a lot of context to Thorin's mission to take back Erebor.
Yeah, and do you remember the line of dialogue where Thorin says, "I went looking for Frayne. You know, he went looking for his father.
Yeah.
In the theatrical version, that's just left up in the air and it never gets resolved.
That's a good point. They change conversation just as quickly.
Yeah. I like this scene too because in terms of real life, on An Unexpected Journey, Ian McKellen, of course, felt a bit left out having to film scenes by himself when he's in a scene where there's going to be dwarves and Bilbo and that. And I think this might have been a nice little way too, extra way for Peter Jackson to say, okay, here's a scene where it's just you and Thorin and we can have you in the same location when we're filming. You don't have to be filmed separately.
You believe this was filmed using forced perspective, like the previous films?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, it looks that way to me as well. And you can't really see the lack of depth. Because, you know, you have to remember these two actors are about as tall as each other.
I believe it was more difficult to film film the two in the same room because the new cameras made it difficult to film using forced perspective. So placing Sir Ian in a separate set had to be done, which was the case in the bag end scenes.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think
But like
it's all
you
pretty
guys
seamless.
said, it's a great... It is seamless, but at the same time it's great to see the old techniques being used for this scene.
Yeah, I just love the way how... well, for me personally, I love the way how Peter Jackson tells these stories.
I think to date he's probably he's so far the one proven director of the Middle-earth movies who can do them in live action so well. We've had other directors for Star Wars and Harry Potter, but he's been the most consistent with all 6 films.
Do you think... how do you think Guillermo del Toro would have done with these films, guys?
I think his films would have been darker. They would have used maybe more practical effects and sets, but they would have felt very different to both the book and the Middle-earth that we had seen in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Yeah, he still gets
He's a great
credited too with writing the screenplays, his involvement too, so I think maybe, I don't know how much of what he wrote is still in the final product, but he still does get credited nonetheless.
That's true.
And I quite like this scene with Bayonne, is it? We see Bayonne
Yes.
for the first time. Yeah, and we see the sweeping shot of the mountains. And I think Peter Jackson, I like how he cuts from Bayonne to the wards, and then we see that sweeping shot of the mountains. I just think, it's just such a great way to open the film.
It certainly gives an ominous feeling, doesn't it, of something evil coming out of the mountains.
Yeah.
Specifically, the wargs descending from it. By the way, I do actually think it's kind of funny from an adaptation standpoint that the first time we see Bayonne, he's actually a bear. And when the company first meets him, he's actually in his human form. What do you guys think of?
There's a bit of a werewolf insinuation too thing going on here with Bayonne, I feel. Even though obviously he's not a wolf and doesn't turn into a werewolf. But you can sort of see the elements that have been applied to his character from that style of monster, if you will.
I feel you're right, because even in his human form, he does look as though he could transform into a bear fairly realistically. He has a huge mane for hair, and even his teeth look a bit like fangs. He seems to resemble more of the Wolfman from the Universal Monster series.
Yeah, and as we know, Peter Jackson's a fan of horror too, having also directed in the genre.
Exactly,
True.
yeah, that's what I was going to say.
By the way, that's not special effects. Peter Hambleton, who did play Bomber, actually did run as fast as that, and everybody was surprised by it.
Wow, gotta give credit to the guy for that.
Definitely.
And that's the thing I think with these
Yeah.
movies. Yes, they do make fun of his weight and that, but it's not mean-spirited in a way that a lot of modern comedies would have a character such as that.
Nah, I mean, and also you have to remember, Ian McKellen is in his late 70s, and the fact that he's able to keep up with these guys, it's just, wow.
That is very impressive. I doubt I'd be able to have that level of athleticism when I reach his age.
Well, it's entirely possible.
By the way, I love the intricacy and detail of Beorn's house. It feels so homely, but at the same time so vast and all-encompassing at the same time.
And I like how one of the dwarves says, it's not natural, none of it. And
That was Sam's line, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I was wondering if maybe that's to purposely echo, what Sam said in Two Towers.
I think it is. I think it's a very deliberate reference. When I first heard it, I thought, did I just hear that correctly? It kind of took me by surprise.
Now with Bjorn too, when he's in his bear form, is his memories affected at all by the changeover when he returns to human? Because one thing I thought was, okay, he sees them in his bear form as dwarves, and he hates dwarves, so when he's human, he doesn't seem to remember that he saw them, and it seems like, a bit of not a surprise shock to him, but... And I was just wondering, what do you guys think? Do you think that is something that is part of the character, or do you think that was added, or...
I think it's entirely possible, but I also think that may have been added to the films to give his bear form more of an unpredictable nature. Because the important thing at this point, he's neither friend nor foe, he's truly neutral.
Yeah.
I really think that Azog the Defiler is a very memorable side villain, or main villain if you like, for these films. I think he's probably my favourite orc villain out of all the films.
I think he's a great villain. He actually brings a lot of tension and as well as personality to the mission to hunt the dwarves down. He's also one of the few orcs to talk back to the necromancer and not be killed. So clearly, that guy has balls.
Yeah.
Even though I do wish he was made with prosthetics, at the same time, I'm still glad that they were able to make him so memorable at the same time. I also really, really love the darkness and sense of dread that emanates from Dol Guldur.
Very spooky place.
I wouldn't want to go there.
I wouldn't want to be in the same space as Sauron, who I think they absolutely nailed his incorporeal form as this dark, all-consuming presence. What do you guys think?
I think, based on what I've personally read about Sauron, he feels maybe a little bit more like Sauron in these films. Because Sauron, as you'd probably say, Oscar, he's called Sauron the Deceiver. He deceives people, and he hides in the shadows, and he works his machinations from there. And that kind of feels to me more in line with something the Sauron I've read about would do, personally.
Yeah, it seems to fit his character more to hide from the shadows and send his minions to do his dirty work.
I still think, though, that of course in Lord of the Rings he retains his omnipotent kind of... That might not be the right word, but I think his presence, even though people know that he's come back, there's still that threat of is he behind me now? Is he above me? Is he, if I step out my front door, am I going to be attacked by Sauron himself? And you've got that sort of thing going, but a lot of his stuff is, getting others to do his dirty work, and he still does that, of course, in Lord of the Rings with his own orcs and also spies and that kind of thing.
That is actually a very good point, Rod, and that isn't to say he's portrayed badly in Lord of the Rings, far from it, but there's something about seeing him when he's still fairly vulnerable and fairly kept locked in the shadows that makes him a little more creepier.
Absolutely.
And I like the voice work they do for Sauron as well.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah. Surprisingly, what could be a surprise to everyone, I really like him in these films.
Surprised me as well.
Well, for me, I haven't seen him in a movie where he's a human and he's the main character. I haven't seen any of his movies like that before, so the only experience I've had with his performance skills is through these movies.
Frankly, I feel this scene with Gandalf instructing the dwarves to show themselves to Beorn, this should have been kept in the theatrical cut. Because not only does it actually adapt a very wonderful scene from the book beautifully, it also alleviates some of the tension from the previous scene.
Yeah, do you guys think this affects the pacing? Because I personally don't feel as though it does.
I think good pacing can be affected by good characterization, humour and storytelling, and we see that presented through this scene, so it isn't dragging anything, at least in my opinion.
No, I don't think it affects the pacing at all. I think the pacing in this scene, because you've got a lot of stuff happening, it's, as you said, the tension and that from the previous scene, it sort of alleviates that. It gradually goes in that direction of, okay, it's not making the movie stop in its tracks. That's for sure.
It's also interesting to note that it takes a lot to actually phase Gandalf, but being in Beorn's presence makes him visibly nervous.
Yeah, he knows what this guy's capable of.
And I like how it's a gradual sort of thing of revealing the number of dwarves. It's not just here's all of them at one time.
It's a good point. It's another way of showing how clever Gandalf is at easing Beorn into the situation rather than overwhelming and provoking him. What do you guys think of the possibility of Ron Perlman playing Beorn if Guillermo del Toro was still attached to direct?
Well, I don't have anything against Ron Perlman personally, but I think if he would have done it, we would have been like, oh, Ron Perlman is Ron Perlman because he's such a distinctive actor. And I think for me personally, that would have been a bit distracting. I would have been focused completely on the fact that it was Ron Perlman instead of judging Beorn as a character, which is what I should be doing.
And that's a fantastic point, actually, because a lot of times in movies, people see the actor rather than the character.
Yeah, and I always tend to see Ron Perlman.
He's a Hobbit, good family, and unimpeachable reputation.
I have a very distinctive memory of Beorn in the book having a large, bushy black beard. Here he does seem a little more bear-like in his appearance. That isn't to say I dislike the change. It's just very different to what I had initially pictured.
So it's not really a change you have any problem with then?
It's a change I notice and I'm not too keen on, but at the same time I kind of understand why they made it. To make the distinction that he was more bear than human, I suppose. What do you feel about it, Rod?
Well, I don't really have an issue with it, to be honest. The thing with his character is there's that bit of unpredictability about him. And I think having him in human form still have a great number of things about him that suggest he can turn into a bear. I think that's just part of that, and it's also a way that he still has some sort of menace to any outsiders who might try and come into his lands without permission, to do bad things. So he's a very imposing man, to say the least, and we see that through Gandalf and how he approaches him. He still approaches him like a wild dog or a wild bear, and has to be very cautious and slow in dealing with him so he doesn't anger him in any way.
That's a great point. Sometimes it's interesting as a book reader to see these changes come about through adaptation, but one thing that really surprised me was this backstory he has, which involves most of his kin being slain by the orcs, even though most of the skin changers were actually still alive at this point. It sort of reminded me of what happens to the men of the Druidan Forest in Return of the King, who were a race of primitive men who were persecuted by the orcs almost to the point of extinction.
My people were the first to live in the mountains. Before the orcs came down from the north, the Defile killed most of our family.
I like scenes like this of talking. I don't mind it, as long as what's being spoken about is interesting.
You understand?
Yeah, with Beorn telling his story.
Skin changers, torturing them.
Even though exposition does tend to get criticised a lot in films, when it's interesting exposition, when it relays something about the characters or the world, then it's good.
No?
At least I think so.
Yeah, I think so as well.
It's just how you handle it, how it's executed, really. There's a lot of movies that have a great way of executing the exposition. One example I like to point to a lot is The Terminator, when Kyle Reese is explaining to Sarah everything about the Terminator. And it's not him just sitting there and in a cafe or in some quiet location. It's on the run as the action's happening.
That's a good point.
We will take the Elven road.
But here it's different. It reminds me of things like the Council of Elrond. I would have loved to have seen an hour or two devoted just to the Council of Elrond. It wouldn't have worried me, but I know that you can't really do that in the theatrical, and maybe not even the extended sometimes.
No, good point. I mean, I like that we got a little bit more of the council scene in the extended edition of Fellowship. And here, it carries a similar weight, because Beorn is in many ways a messenger of the land to Gandalf. He's perhaps more attuned to its needs than Radagast is, perhaps.
I like how he says, I don't like dwarves, they're greedy and blind. And then he grabs hold of the mouse.
Yeah, that was a really tense scene, because you are almost led to believe that he could crush this mouse out of pure malice, but the fact that he doesn't also shows that he does have a strong, compassionate side as well.
Exactly.
And it was all done through good camera techniques and the actor's performance.
Of course.
A great marriage of those two elements.
Maybe watch. The orcs will not give up. They will hunt the dwarves.
We have a very interesting flashback showing the Dunedain of the North bearing what appears to be the Witch King of Angmar.
And it's from my understanding that the Witch King wasn't actually dead.
No, he actually had fled Angmar at the last minute when all his forces were spent. Which makes me think, is this part of Sauron's grand deception? To make people think that the Nazgul had vanished from the north forever?
Well, if you think of it in kind of like a biblical context, it reminds me of a quote, which is, Satan.
Not long past, word spread. The dead.
Sorry, Richard, what was that?
Well, if you think of it in kind of like a biblical context, if you read into it that way, and it reminds me of a quote, which is, Satan's greatest trick was convincing man that he didn't exist.
It certainly does feel that way, and would be very much in character with Sauron, to deceive the entire world into thinking he and his minions were gone for good, when in truth he was hiding and preparing for his next assault.
Yeah.
Yep, pretty much.
It recalls back to when he feigned that he had become good, because there was a time where he was good to begin with, but then he became evil, and then he was captured, but then he feigned turning back to good. And I think that is another example of how deceptive he can be.
If that enemy has returned,
I completely agree.
have you tell me?
But we also see how pervasive his dark influence is, turning Mirkwood into a sick, decaying forest as well.
And what does Gandalf the Grey say?
Everything about this forest just emanates disease, sickness, and pestilence.
Yes, like, so who wants to go into Mirkwood first?
There's also a great visual representation of Sauron's slow advance over the Elven kingdoms and their slow retreat from their lands. With there's a statue of an elven maiden covered in weeds and with the red eye painted on her.
The red eye. You could be forgiven for thinking that Mirkwood is spelled M-U-R-K instead of M-I-R-K.
Yeah.
I believe that's the Norse influence, because there is in the Norse sagas there is in fact a Mirkwood mentioned in Norse writings.
Cool.
This forest feels
I just love how atmospheric and heavy feeling the Mirkwood sequences is just that we're coming up to now. It's so well filmed and well shot, and almost feels a bit like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, the very nature of Mirkwood, of deceiving the senses and making you think one thing, but the reality turns out to be very different. The way it defies logic and reason, that in of itself is much closer to how I envisioned Wonderland when reading the Lewis Carroll book.
Yeah, I mean, I personally haven't read the book, but I think I can agree with what you're saying, because it does kind of accidentally feel a bit more how I would expect Wonderland to look and feel, based on what I personally have heard and know about it.
Yeah, I've actually
What do you
never
think,
read
Rod?
Alice in Wonderland before. All I've seen, probably as a kid, of course, the Disney Alice in Wonderland, but only that, and also the Tim Burton one I've seen, but I haven't read the actual novel before. But what I like too about Mirkwood is unpredictability, because you're entering a location that you don't actually know what's in store for you in there when you're in there, and I think it has that dreamlike quality, that surrealness to it that you of course see them experience.
I feel like you're right. And it's also important to know that even Gandalf feels visibly nervous about entering the forest, and even though he has to leave for his own errands, he still imparts very important advice to the dwarves not to touch the water of the enchanted lake, of the enchanted stream that we see in the forest.
Yeah, and I quite like the scene when Gandalf asks Bilbo what he found, and Bilbo is kind of like subtly clinging onto the ring, and I wonder if Gandalf knows, but he's just not letting on.
I think if he did know, it would invite all sorts of questions as to why he didn't act upon it sooner. I like to think that he suspected that there was something magical and perhaps sinister about the ring, but he was too busy with other missions to give it the right time and attention.
Yeah, for example, his mission of going to the tombs to confirm for sure if whether or not the dead are back is quite important if you think about it. You know, he has to confirm for himself if the Nazgul are back and all the rest of it, because or otherwise they won't know what they're up against.
Indeed.
He's willing to do what Saruman doesn't do, which is to actually investigate himself. But then again, we don't know, because you've got Saruman's change from being good to a villain. So you don't know how much of that villainous aspect to him has begun, or how strong it is.
Indeed. Tolkien suggested that Saruman was actually starting to search for the ring to use for himself, but was still theoretically on the side of good. He was still opposing Sauron, but there was still a large streak of selfishness in that.
Yeah. But with the ring in Bilbo's pocket, I think that, yeah, if Gandalf knew it was the One Ring, I don't think he'd be as ignorant to it as one might think, really, to be honest. You've got to also take into consideration, aside from the One Ring, the 7 that were given to the dwarves, the 9 that were given to the men, and the 3 that the elves had. I think there's many other rings too that have magical properties, because I think in Fellowship of the Ring it is when Gandalf actually voices to, I think it's Bilbo or Frodo, that there are many magical rings in this world.
That's right, he does say that to Bilbo in Bag End.
Yeah, so I think you could be forgiven for thinking that Gandalf doesn't seem to be that worried about the ring, because it's like, well, maybe, but I just think that he doesn't actually know that it's the One Ring.
True. So, Richard, what do you think of Martin Freeman's performance in this film? Because I believe you like him here more than in An Unexpected Journey.
Well, when I saw it, Unexpected Journey, I had been a little bit overwhelmed by the hype of Sherlock. So it took me a while for me personally to kind of like warm up to him as Bilbo. But by the time this film rolled around and I saw how active and thinking on his feet and clever Bilbo is, and how strong he is, I really began to like his portrayal. And I don't think anyone else could have played the role. I think Martin Freeman, he gets the comic timing, he gets the physicality, and like the overall sort of like friendly nature that Bilbo has down to a T.
I completely agree. I don't think there was anyone who could have played Bilbo as well as Martin Freeman did. Even a really good actor like James McAvoy would have felt miscast.
Yeah, I can't. I think James McAvoy, like you said, he is a good actor, but I don't. I personally can't really see him in this role. I think maybe Ian Holm could have done it if they had maybe done these films a few years after Lord of the Rings, but obviously Ian Holm was maybe like too old to do scenes like this by this point. But yeah, I really think Martin Freeman does a good job.
Wasn't James McAvoy one of the people that was rumoured before Martin Freeman was cast?
I think so, yeah.
Actually. There were other rumours suggesting Daniel Radcliffe being suggested as well.
Oh, no.
Oh, if you think that's bad, Warner Brothers were honest to God considering Shia LaBeouf as Bilbo.
No.
No. I'm Bilbo. No. The ring. No.
I should stress that this was a Warner Brothers decision, not a Jackson one, who always wanted Martin Freeman.
I don't believe in luck. We make our own.
Yes, it's good that clearer heads prevailed.
That's right. But can you see why it took me a while for me to warm up to Martin Freeman in the role?
I guess it just goes to show the pervasive influence of hype.
Yeah. Of a certain TV series and another actor in this film that's in that TV series.
True.
And the thing is, I find personally, I hadn't seen him in anything. Although I think I did see him in a minor role in some movie years and years and years before I saw The Hobbit. So I didn't really have any idea of what to expect from him as an actor. It was like when they cast a new James Bond. Unless it's someone really obviously that I feel shouldn't be in the role, I only really figure out if I like a character in a role when I see them in the role. So I think that's similar with Martin Freeman as Bilbo. I didn't know what to expect from him. So I was like a clean slate, really.
Yeah. To me personally, he is Bilbo. He just is Bilbo. I think as I said, he just captures the character perfectly. Yeah, what do you guys think of the fact that Bilbo has a tendency to take charge and think his way out of a situation and fights to save his friends when he has to?
It's definitely something that I feel Martin's acting does emphasize more, perhaps maybe even more than Ian Holm might have been able to do in this situation. Something about him seems a lot more earnest and down to earth, and which makes his feats of heroism all the more inspiring, I think.
Yeah, I like that aspect. It's also him coming into his own in terms of his courage, and he's no longer, even at this point, he's no longer the same Hobbit he was when we first meet him, as Martin Freeman, a younger Bilbo. When we first meet him in the previous film, he doesn't want to go on adventures, he doesn't want to go outside his comfort zone, and he's definitely out of his comfort zone now, being in Mirkwood. But he's not running away, he's not cowardice, anything like that. He's really coming into his own with his courage.
Indeed, and he's the first one to, in this scene in particular, to notice that they need to get their bearings and need to see the sun.
Yeah. Then
I like the way how. Oh, sorry, guys.
No, that's all right. I was just
saying,
about to say you don't know about the ring and its influence either in that courage aspect.
True.
I like the way how this scene just kind of keeps going, and it draws you more and more into the forest, and you kind of know in the back of your mind that something is coming, whether or not it's giant spiders or whatever, and you know these guys are in trouble.
They foreshadow the coming of the spiders with the cobwebs all over the place.
Yeah. I suppose they couldn't have made that more obvious. And you know when Bilbo twangs the spider web, I don't think that's necessarily Bilbo being stupid. I think that's more him kind of being new to this forest and not really expecting that.
I think it's natural curiosity more than anything else.
Yeah. And some have said, well, he just pretty much does what Pippin does in Fellowship of the Ring when he pushes over that dead dwarf body. But I don't really see it as the same thing. I think it's two different situations and two different characters, and yeah, like you said, it's just Bilbo just curiously thinking, oh, what's that? No, what's that? You know, what's this thing here?
Yeah.
I'd say he's smarter than Pippin overall, but he still has that tookish side of curiosity to him.
Yeah, that Took side is the more adventurous and more curious, and of course that comes into play. And yeah, I don't think him twanging the spiderweb is a moment of idiocy on his part. It's just a moment of curiosity.
No. By the way,
it
has to be said, these spiders scare the pants off me. I've gotten used to Shelob over the years, but these spiders still give me the creeps.
I like their voice acting, when they talk.
I know. I mean, it's brilliant in the sense that in the book the spiders just talk like the same way the eagles or the birds talk, but here it's given a little more explanation in that it's the ring translating the thoughts in their heads for Bilbo to hear them.
Ah, I didn't know that.
That was a very clever touch that I actually think that's something Tolkien might have even added if he decided to revise The Hobbit.
Yeah, I think that was a good thing that they did, and I liked it when I first saw it, even in the theatrical. I was like, that's a great idea.
There are some pretty nasty spiders that live in Australia, aren't there, Rob?
Yes, and thankfully I haven't come face to face with any of them, so I'm quite happy.
Yeah, I've heard spiders over there are quite big.
Though thankfully not as big as these monstrosities.
No, one would hope not.
These spiders actually remind me more of Black Widow spiders. Very venomous and also particularly nasty.
You know what's kind of weird? Some people have said this film was ripping off Harry Potter with the use of giant spiders. And I was like, really? You clearly know bugger all about literature then.
Well, it was a rip-off.
I really hate it when people said that, because it's obvious in my eyes that J.K. Rowling was inspired by The Hobbit when she wrote the spider scene in the Chamber of Secrets.
Yeah, this film just so happened to have come out after Harry Potter. That's it.
No,
Exactly.
I think you're wrong though, because Tolkien used a time machine and travelled forward in time, read the Harry Potter movies, and then went back to his own time and wrote Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And so yes, he did actually copy it. And my name is Emily Blunt.
Oh, that was.
Oh, your name is Emily Blunt? Well, that's an interesting, because I'm the Princess of Ireland.
And I'm the Duke of Buckingham.
And I've got a DeLorean that I can time travel in out in my driveway.
Disregarding the fact that I am in fact a guy, Ireland doesn't have a monarchy.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Yeah.
That criticism.
Do you like how
Bilbo? Do
you like how Bilbo names his sword in this scene?
Yeah, I thought that was quite good. I don't know if that's in the book though.
It's a rough approximation, because in the book the spider is the very first thing he kills, and that's when he decides to give the sword a name.
Bear in mind, I've only read Fellowship in 2 hours, and I'm taking a break before I tackle Return of the King.
Oh, I actually... Back in year 7, I was hardcore. I read all of them back to back through every school break and every hour at home.
Yeah, well, for me they are good books, but they can be a tad hard to read, but I do enjoy them.
Oh, they are hard to read, but at the same time I was so inspired by what I had seen in the Lord of the Rings films that I couldn't stop myself.
Oh, that's fair enough.
For me, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit reading that was great, because I think it greatly improved at the time my reading level. Because I was fairly young. I was probably about 11 or 12, I think, when I first started reading Tolkien stuff.
Oh, really? I was 9 when Fellowship of the Ring came out, and I was pretty much way too scared of it.
Yeah.
Speaking of scary, how intense is it when Bilbo starts stabbing the King Kong arachnid for touching the ring?
Yeah.
It just goes to show just how, well, for me personally, I think it shows that Bilbo's mind is starting to get warped by the ring.
I think it's a great demonstration of that as well.
Yeah.
You see a little bit more of the corrupted side of Gollum starting to emerge. And once again, Freeman's acting just completely delivers on believing him on the darker side of the darker Bilbo that killed the arachnid, and the more innocent, pure side that realizes the horrible thing that he just did.
I'm just going to put this out there, but I think this entire sequence in Mirkwood with the spiders is probably my favourite scene in the film.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful scene, but for me, it's
one of them anyway. I just think it's a very well done scene, personally.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the spiders look real.
And of course, it segues into the introduction of everybody's favourite elven prince, Legolas.
Showing off. Yeah,
Yes.
this starts what I like to call elves showing off porn. I do enjoy the elves. I think they're awesome, but come on, some of the shit they do.
I agree. Sometimes they seem one superpower short of being Kryptonians by how powerful they are.
Well,
Yeah, but it is fun to watch, though, I must say.
weren't the elves
I'm sorry,
created
Rob,
first, though?
They were, yes.
So I guess...
So they are imbued with more powers and specialties.
Yeah, it's like they were the favourite creation.
True.
And then you had that other, one of the gods, if you will, who created the dwarves and was sort of chastised a bit. I think, I may be wrong, but was a bit chastised for creating the dwarves.
That's right. By the way, I really like how Gloin actually carries a locket with his wife and his young son along with him. A nice bit of character building.
I love the way how after Bilbo kills the arachnid thing, whatever it is, and he picks up the ring and he says, "Mine."
I like that too. That was a very, very dark moment for Bilbo, and definitely showed the corrupting side of the ring. What do you guys think of Tariel? Well,
I think she fits this world. I mean, the Sylvian elves are hinted at one point in the books, I think. So, for me, it's not unfeasible for her to, exist in this, in these films anyway.
I feel a similar way. In fact, it should be noted that the Sylvan elves are the residents of Mirkwood.
Well, there you go then.
In the book, there is a captain of the Elven Guard, and that's essentially what Tariel's role in the movies are. But in this case, she gets a lot more to do.
I think having her involved
So it's sort of taking...
is okay, because she would have been one of the elves that went into the West. So that is a way to explain why she's not seen in Lord of the Rings.
That's what I like to think too.
Because we don't get told every single elf who goes into the West. They don't say, well, here's a roll call list of all the elves that went into the West.
Indeed.
Well, the thing about some fandoms are they need everything explained for them. And even if that happens, they complain anyway.
What actually impressed me was the casting and performance of Lee Pace as Thranduil. Not only does he get a very stylish introduction, like a few seconds ago, but his scenes with Thorin are just absolutely amazing.
He looks a bit like Sauron in some of the illustrations of Sauron that I've personally seen. When Sauron was a man.
I have to say, I did not appreciate the trousers line from Keeley. I actually think that's probably the single worst line in the entire series. It doesn't gel with the tone, it wasn't funny, and it still makes me cringe every time. And on the whole, I just don't like the idea of the love triangle. I grew to like Keeley and Tariel as a romantic item because of the strength of the performances, but I tend to see Legolas and Tariel as more big brother, little sister than lovers.
Well, wasn't that something that Warner Brothers themselves wanted to make it out to be? That Legolas and Tauriel weren't just, that they had some kind of feeling for each other?
Yes, that is in fact a Warner Brothers decision, I believe. But for what it's worth...
Yeah.
Sorry, you first.
The thing is, with that, I don't know, I think Thranduil says that he's grown fond of her, but just because you grow fond of someone doesn't necessarily mean that you want to bed them.
Exactly.
No, not really. I don't know about you guys, but I never got the feeling that Legolas had overtly romantic feelings for Tauriel.
No, I don't get that feeling either. If anything, I almost feel like Peter Jackson directed Orlando Bloom and Evangeline Lilly to play their relationship more as friends or siblings rather than lovers.
Yeah, I think so as well. People said that the love triangle was bad, but for some reason I never got the sense there was a love triangle.
I do think it's a bad addition, but it's mostly mitigated by the performances.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Jackson, he probably thought it was a stupid idea, so he thought, no, I'm not going to put it in. And I can't really blame him for doing that.
Me neither.
The thing is, if you have a successful series of films like you had with Lord of the Rings, and then you get a chance to do these prequel films, The Hobbit, I think as a studio, that's not the time to say, well, we're going to put all these mandates that we want to put on it. It's like, no. You want to do the prequels to some of the best films ever made, you give the filmmakers more say in what actually happens, considering they were, you know, a major part of the reason why the other films found such success.
I feel the exact same way. And at the same time, with all the controversy surrounding the films, it also means that a lot of the genuinely good parts just get flat out overlooked and ignored.
I think that's an example of letting external factors outside of the film affect too much how you see the actual movie, because sometimes those things aren't actually reflected in the film itself.
No, not really. By the way, guys, what did you think of that moment where Thranduil reveals what appears to be a large scar across his face? This was something that surprised me.
Well, I'm kind of bummed out because I thought in this extended version we were going to get a scene, like a mini clip of seeing Thranduil get burned, but we didn't get that. But yeah, no, overall it is quite like a good scene to show that Thranduil does have a history with dragons. It's like, dude, I've been face to face with dragons. Don't think I don't know how it feels.
Thranduil's been around since the First Age, at a time when dragons and orcs fought side by side. He's much older than any of the dwarves in the movie, and it does seem to me that he might have sustained an injury of sorts while fighting against Morgoth. He does seem to remind me more of the elves from the Silmarillion, having more of an arrogant and slightly xenophobic bearing.
Yeah, I like that aspect too. I think it was a good idea to put that into him, because it is like a bridge between the elves and how they feel towards the dwarves in the Silmarillion, how extreme that is, and it's a nice bridge to what we get eventually in Lord of the Rings with Legolas and Gimli.
I feel the same way. And the one main reason why I actually really did genuinely like the scene between between Tariel and Keely in the dungeons was because it had a very nice contrast to it. The leaders of the elves and dwarves, Thorin and Thranduil, had such bitter enmity towards each other, but these two, who are basically the equivalent of teenagers, or children among elves and dwarves, actually don't carry that prejudice. It was an optimistic overture that suggested that the two races could cast aside their petty differences.
Yeah, it's a good contrast to the way how Thranduil and Thorin feel about each other, isn't it?
Yeah.
It does have a little bit of a Shakespeare vibe as well, I noticed. What with the, as in a Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, in that it ultimately ends in tragedy.
I like the way how Thorin says something insulting in Dwarvish, and Balin, is it?
Yes.
Balin, he's like, oh well, that's that then. We're stuck here thanks to you.
Yeah, I like that. So it was a very nice, subtle bit of humour from Balin.
Yeah, I think Balin and Thorin, they're a bit like an old married couple, aren't they?
They kind of are, now that I think about it.
Just like Balin knows just how stubborn and pig-headed his friend in King can be, and that's why he kind of wasn't surprised by what Thorin did.
No. But I also think that it's a very subtle prelude to the Battle of the Five Armies, and how Balin outright basically says to Thorin, you know, I'm just basically boiling it down to basics. You've changed since you came back here since you got all this gold back.
I believe that's Dwalin who says that. We'll have to wait until the next film. I really liked the addition of the runestone in this scene, because we actually get a sense of Fili and Keely's mother, who is actually Thorin's sister. And if you watch this scene with the realization of what happens to these three characters, it actually makes it a lot more tragic. Because in the end, in the end, Fili and Keely's mother probably suffers the greatest loss of all these films. I actually thought it was a very clever way of including her into the proceedings.
Yeah, overall, I don't have any problems with her inclusion in these films.
I think her inclusion is nowhere near as offensive as a lot of Tolkien purists and a lot of mean-spirited fans make it out to be. I just kind of wish it was executed differently.
Well, do you remember how with the Lord of the Rings films, a lot of people said all the female characters do is stand around doing nothing and look sad? And then we get Tariel, who is strong, who can fight, and actually does quite a lot. And they complain about it anyway. It's like, well, why bother listening to them then if all they're going to do is complain, even if Peter Jackson fixes a criticism that they had?
Of course. It's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation.
Yeah, and that's why I don't. That's why I don't take the opinions of fandom seriously. What were you going to say then, Rod?
Actually, I was going to say, it reminds me too of people who saw Superman Returns, and it's like, well, Superman stalks Lois and he does all these things and he just doesn't fight much and all that. Man of Steel, he doesn't stalk Lois and there's more fighting that he does. Oh no, we don't want that. We'll go watch Superman Returns. Okay. No, we don't want this. We'll go watch Man of Steel. Yeah, okay. No, we don't want that. It's just sort of like...
It's sort of a never-ending cycle of sort of self-criticism and never actually doing anything creative.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean,
fortunately,
if you don't
they are able to... Sorry.
No, you go on.
Fortunately, I think the films managed to escape most of those criticisms, because in Lord of the Rings we had Éowyn as the strong female warrior character, and in the Hobbits we not only get Tariel, but we also get Galadriel as well, as we see later on, having a major part to play in the battle against the forces of evil. I have to say, that must be some extremely strong elven wine to conk out those two guards. It's no wonder Legolas did so well in the drinking competition at Edoras.
Exactly. I was just thinking, that scene where Tauriel is talking to Kili, and you see Legolas looking on. Now, some people might look at his expression and think that's an expression of someone seeing someone that they love talking to someone that they don't want them to, and feeling like, why is the person that I have feelings for seeing someone? And to that I would say, well, no, he's looking at her like that because it's like, why is one of our own speaking to the dwarves?
That's actually a great way of putting it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I get the feeling that the studio mandate for a love triangle was there, but Peter Jackson didn't put it in.
Or at least he underplayed it to the point in which you could only really believe it if you had read all of the online tabloids and stuff.
Yeah, which some people did, and they used that as a criticism. But for me personally, after watching this film a few times and really thinking about it, I suppose if I was reaching, and I mean completely reaching, there would be hints of the love triangle there. But I don't get the sense it's as shoved in my face as some other people felt it was. I mean, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but that's what I personally take from it.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
I also understand you actually really like this barrel sequence, Richard.
I do, yeah. I think barrel sequence. If you think about it, it's a unique action scene because something like that has never been done before, and it's completely original. And when people say, "Oh, there was nothing new or creative about these films," I just think the barrel scene. Okay, I can't think of any other scene that's ever been done like that before. You've got the dwarves riding down the rapids. You've got Legolas and Turiel and the elves fighting the orcs, and it's just such a fast-paced, exciting scene. And it had me glued to my seat when I first saw it.
I was aware of this from the trailers, and I suspected that it would be an action set piece of sorts. But at the same time, I found myself enjoying it because of it was actually a pretty well put together sequence. It combined the actors' performances with real sets, real water, as well as frequent CGI implements, which you kind of have to do in a situation like this. You can't. I think they have rules and regulations for the actors' safety, as well as filming in New Zealand's rivers and parks.
Is that an environmental thing?
It might be.
Yeah, I think that could have been a factor if there's those sorts of laws about what they can do in certain areas and some restrictions that they had. So of course, yeah, you need to use the CG in that equation too.
Overall, it's hard to really imagine the sequence being done with more practical effects and shots and all that stuff. It was the first of its kind, and even if someone does do it technically better in the future, I'm still really glad that we got it.
Yeah, it wasn't skipped over. They could have easily written it that they just escaped not into a river, but just basically into like a little cave, and then they come out of the cave and they're already on flat ground, and then they just walk off. But then that would have been cutting out something from the book that I think was good to include.
Yeah, every time I watch this scene, I just watch it with like a big grin on my face because I just think this is a film that fires on all cylinders in terms of the action, I think.
I also think it's funny that how Keeley is injured is with taking an arrow in the knee, kind of like Skyrim.
He took an arrow to the knee. Shut up.
Just a flesh wound.
That meme isn't overused at all.
I think the closest thing I'd ever seen this kind of river set piece was in the King Kong video game, which involves you rolling down some rapids on a rickety raft, and there are natives and dinosaurs hunting you.
Maybe Peter Jackson should do a Jurassic Park film.
I would actually be kind of open to that.
Yeah.
He'd be put him on the sixth and final film. Close the trilogy out.
Yeah, because they have cast a director. Well, not cast, but they've hired the director for Jurassic World 2.
That's right, a horror director called J.A. Bayona. I actually need to see some of his films, but I've heard he's really good at his craft. Sort of like Peter Jackson was when he started his career as a horror director.
Yeah, I just think there's some aspects of being a horror director that, come in handy even when you're doing other genres.
True. I mean, who could have... I couldn't have imagined a sequence like this, and even if some people say it's too heavily CGI'd or too over the top, they may have a point, but at the same time, it's something unique that I haven't seen before in film, so surely that has merit.
Yeah.
Even if I do have kind of mixed feelings of Bomber bouncing around the place in his barrel and taking out a whole squad of orcs.
He's like a mini tank when he does that.
He is, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's kind of like Obelix from the Asterix and Obelix series.
Yeah. He is, yeah.
You have to remember as well, Bomber is strong. He's a very strong.
He is strong. He is, definitely. Oh, there he goes. Legolas showing off. Prancing on dwarven heads, shooting arrows left, right, and centre.
Yeah, this is what I mean by elf showing off porn.
It is.
But it's fun elf showing off porn. I quite like it.
Yeah, I think some fans would have been disappointed considering what he does in Lord of the Rings. They'd be a bit disappointed if there wasn't any of that in these movies of him being flamboyant, shall we say, with killing.
So I think he does have a place as Thranduil's son, and since it's never said that he was off in another part of Middle Earth in the books, I do think it is reasonable to assume he was in Mirkwood at the time.
A bit of artistic license that I think can be effective, and yeah, I just think that his inclusion, some might say, well, they just included him because he was in Lord of the Rings and they wanted to have someone else from Lord of the Rings be in it. But I just think that it's an inclusion that works within the story, because if you know from The Hobbit, he isn't mentioned, but that doesn't mean he could not have been there.
Exactly. I love the scene of Gandalf exploring the tombs in the high fells of Rhudaur. There's something very atmospheric and creepy about them. As a book reader, I do actually know where the Nazgul were at the same time Angmar fell, and I think this sort of feeds into your theory, Richard, about Sauron and the Nine tricking the powers of good into thinking that they were defeated entirely.
Yeah, kind of like working behind the scenes, as it were, to making everyone think that they were dead when in fact they weren't.
That's right.
I always got the sense that Sauron was planning all of this for a long time.
I believe you're right. He's even after losing his powers at the end of the Second Age, he was still plotting his eventual return.
I think how much patience that sort of takes too.
True. And once again, Radagast makes a welcome return. Even if he does, even though a lot of people sort of criticize him for appearing to be addled by mushrooms and quite eccentric, I like how he does seem a lot more focused and is the one to remind Gandalf of his purpose to stop Sauron from gaining a greater foothold.
What do you guys think of the scene where Thorin saves Legolas's life?
I thought it was a nice touch, actually. In the sense that even though Thorin heavily distrusts the elves, he would still rather much rather stop the orcs from killing a would-be ally in their escape.
And you never know, maybe Legolas at the back of his mind remembered that moment, so when later he's along with Gimli, because you never know, this is the thing, you can have a memory of something from way back, even at the most unrelated moments. So, I'd like to think that maybe somewhere in the back of his memory, Legolas was able to go, have a quick thought of him being saved by Thorin, and then him realizing that, yeah, the dwarves do have qualities that are more sort of, what's the word, palatable? Or palatable?
Palatable.
That's it, yeah, palatable for elves. I mean, that's just like a fan thought. I'm not saying that's canon or anything, but
I think there's something there.
Yeah, because I hate it when people state a theory about a film that they've come up with as a fact. So I'm definitely not saying that's a fact.
Yeah, we wouldn't. I'm not. My own theories are pretty much just theories and not canonical, but they are something that I imagined would reconcile some of the severe differences from film to book.
Yeah, like how my theory is that the the Nazgul and the Witch King broke out of their tomb a long time ago, and well, they kind of like used their influence and their powers to convince everyone that they were still there, and that's why nobody bothered to like check out the tomb until now.
Very
Well,
likely.
Yeah, I mean, they are lieutenants of Sauron after all, too, so, you know, they're like, he sends them out to do his bidding and that kind of thing, so.
By the way, this is if the Hobbit was still 2 films, this point with the dwarves taking a rest and Bard accosting them, this would have been the end of part 1. Do you think this would have been an interesting point to end the first half?
I thought the film was going to end at that point, funnily enough. And then there were some other scenes as well where I thought the film was going to end.
I have to say, Luke Evans is actually very inspired casting as Bard the Omen.
I can see Luke Evans playing Robin Hood at one point.
I hope he is Robin Hood, even though, based on what I've read last time, there haven't been any talks to bring him on to the next Robin Hood production. Which might be for the best, because it might not work out so well, based on what I've read.
Luke Evans is a bit underrated, isn't he? Because I think he's a very good actor, but he never seems to have gotten the time of day, or maybe roles he deserves either.
I completely agree. I mean, he not only do I think he's underrated, I actually think he is a very subtle and understated and methodical actor, very much in the same style that Viggo Mortensen was as Aragorn.
I have to say, I have no issues with him as an actor. I haven't seen him in anything outside this, and I think he's just someone that, if he does get flack for whatever reason, I just don't feel that there's anything in his performance that warrants any kind of backlash or hatred.
I actually think it's also very important to show him meeting the dwarves outside of Lake Town and bring them into the city. I believe it helps his character stand out a little more, because his introduction in the book is fairly haphazard, to be perfectly honest.
Ooh, Bod?
Yeah. Pretty much the first time we see him in the book, he kills Smaug. There's no real build-up towards it.
Oh, so they did quite a good expansion of his character then.
Yes, I really do think it was necessary to bring him into the action early on, give the audience a chance to really get to know him, and then we could root for him for when he does eventually kill Smaug. I have to say, this was a pretty intense moment, with the orc taunting Tauriel and Thranduil realizing that Sauron has indeed started to emerge. Did you guys have a problem with Thranduil decapitating the orc the way he did? Because, once again, somebody somewhere decided to take issue with it.
I don't see how that could be an issue to begin with. I don't have a comment either much to say about the person who did make it an issue. I think that is really criticism for the sake of criticism.
Some people have suggested that it violates the medieval prisoner or guest rights. That after giving someone your assurance that you won't be killed, you go ahead, that he decides to violate that. My counter argument would be, he's an orc, and even if he was allowed to go back to his friends, they would probably kill him on account of giving up information. Sauron does not accept failure. it's also interesting to note, Thranduil actually lost his father, Orifer, in the Second Age during the War of the Last Alliance. So he does have a very particular grudge against Sauron and his orcs.
I want to watch trouble without borders. All roads, all rivers. Nothing moves but I hear it. No one enters this kingdom. No one leaves it. Following me at noon. You know it every night. Done it? I'm Australian.
Would you believe, guys, that actually David Tennant was considered for the role of Thranduil at one point, before Lee Pace was cast? Richard? Rod?
Yeah,
I'll let Ron.
with his casting, yeah, I don't know. I think David Tennant could have done a good job too, really. But yeah, I just don't. It doesn't worry me either way. I think Lee Pace does a great job too. So, yeah.
I think
don't
for
know.
me,
I don't know if I see David Tennant in that role personally. I think Lee Pace, he was perfectly cast. Every actor in these films are perfectly cast, in my opinion.
I feel the same way, that even if there was a character I flat out despise or consider them not to fit in well, they're still well cast and they still give good performances. It's pretty cool to see these stone ruins on the lake as they approach Lake Town. It kind of gives me the impression that there was a much larger, more sophisticated city at one point before the dragon destroyed it.
It's got a nice atmosphere with all the fog and all that kind of thing. Really effective.
Oh yes, definitely. His name's Bard. How do you know that? I asked him.
Yeah, I quite like this scene on the lake.
We don't.
It's pretty tense in the way that even though these dwarves are still fairly honourable characters, they're still shaken to the point of almost committing murder against the man who's giving them safe passage. It's not necessarily the right thing to do, but is very much a quote-unquote human reaction.
For my investment. Naught but misery and grief and
Thankfully, the sight of Erebor gives Gloin a change of heart.
Yes, they're getting closer to their home.
Hmm. Do you feel that the transition from meeting bards to getting into Lake Town and meeting up with the Master takes too much time? Guys?
Doesn't seem to be an issue for me, really. It's never once crossed my mind that could be a thing.
I'm sorry, I find the dwarves' indignant reactions to being covered in fish quite funny, really.
It is quite funny, yeah. There's a lot of good subtle comedy in this film. And I like the fact that the film has a tendency to slow it down a little bit. It lets you breathe and take in the new locations. And you get to know the character of Bard a little bit more due to the fact that the film has slowed down and it's allowing you to take a breather. It's allowing you to it's allowing you to take in this new place and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. For me, Lake Town might actually be my favourite Hobbit exclusive new setting in these films, because everything from the the fog, the atmosphere, the lighting, the grimy sense of decay, and of course, it has that sense of Dickensian. It has that sense of Dickensian squalor as well.
And here's Alfred.
Oh yes.
Sorry, Oscar. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
It's okay. I have to agree, though. Alfred is a despicable piece of shit. I cannot stand him in the slightest. And I know that's the point, but at the same time...
It's the Master's business, which makes it my business.
Anybody think he might be related to Wormtongue in some way?
I think so. I think he's the Wormtongue of this trilogy.
Oh, he definitely is, but
I don't think he's evil like Grima Wormtongue. I mean, yeah, he's not a nice person, but I don't think he's evil necessarily.
No,
I think he is evil, but
the greed too of humans.
Yes, I guess he does show that. Even in a desperate situation, there's always that one arsehole who's gonna ruin it for everyone.
Yeah.
But even then, I would say Grima had a sense of tragedy, underscoring his scenes in Rohan. Plus, I actually think that Brad Dourif was a spectacular, gave a spectacular performance as Grima.
He did.
The Nordic...
It's a small town, Alfred. Everyone knows where everyone lives.
I love that. That was a great comeback from Bard. I have to say, I really appreciate the Norwegian and Scandinavian feel of the Lake Town architecture.
Yeah, it's very sort of like the places that you'd see somewhere like Norway, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
I love Stephen Fry as the Master. I think.
Oh God, I was so excited to see Stephen Fry as the Master. But at the same time, I started to think, if only Tony Robinson and Rowan Atkinson showed up, this would be like Blackadder in Middle Earth.
It's like a Middle Earth version of Blackadder and Baldric.
Yes, because he's pretty much playing one of the Lord Melchits anyway.
Yeah, I'm just half expecting him to go.
Me too, actually.
Or like in the first series where he plays the Duke of Wellington. The key to a successful campaign is shouting, shout, shout, and shout again.
Oh, that would have also been pretty funny.
Now, Stephen Fry, I think he's the kind of actor where you know who he is, but he can get away with it.
Yeah.
Whereas, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, if Ron Perlman had played Beorn, I'm not entirely sure if he could have got away with it because we would have been too distracted by the fact it was Ron Perlman. But Stephen Fry, I think he's able to sort of get away with it in ways that Ron Perlman wouldn't have been able to get away with if he had been in this film.
I think you're right. It also helps that the Master is mostly a comedic character. He's very gross, he's very disgusting, but there is a certain coarse kind of humour in that. Whereas Beorn is supposed to be completely serious and straight-faced.
Yeah. I love the way how the Master says no one else would have the bollocks, sire.
Yes, the first instance of swear words in Middle-earth until Dane Ironfoot shows up.
Oh, I can't wait till we get to that one.
Alfred, of course, you might notice, has a monobrow.
You're right, he does. I just keep wanting to say, put a razor to that forehead of yours.
That is the first time I've ever seen a movie character with a monobrow.
Really?
Yeah, it's weird to say the least.
I think it plays into people not liking the character because maybe subconsciously they realise he's got a monobrow and maybe that is something that's off about him, but they can't quite put their finger on everything that's off about him.
He looks like Ed from Ed, Edd and Eddy.
Ugh, I only just realised that now. Ugh.
He's not as stupid as Ed, though.
No. Well, marginally.
I remember that baby in The Simpsons that has a monobrow that Maggie doesn't like.
Ah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah. I remember one episode where Maggie, she like breaks her baby bottle in half, and she uses it as like a glass bottle to try and fight that baby.
Yeah.
I have to ask you guys. Sorry, you first.
I'm sorry. I wonder if that monobrow is prosthetic makeup or something, or if it's natural.
I think it is prosthetics.
What were you going to say then, Oscar?
It's interesting to remember that even though in this film Bard is a bargeman and a smuggler, in the book he was actually the captain of the guards, so he actually did have a position of authority in Lake Town. Here, the guard captain is this sleazebag named Braga. I just thought it was a very odd change. It didn't make me dislike the character of Bard, but it was odd to see. But it was interesting to see how the Master had more of a pervasive influence through this guard captain.
It's been a long time since I've actually read The Hobbit, and I haven't even read it since these movies came out.
Yeah, that scene where the woman, she drops something on the knocked out guard to like make him pass out again.
I love that bit.
Yeah. Nice bit of slapstick humour.
And to think, again, people said that there was no good comedy in these films.
I think the comedy in this film tends to be a bit of a mixed bag. Some of it is leans a little too much on the grotesque or slapsticky, but some of it is suitably subtle.
I like how straight-laced Luke Evans plays Bard in the comedy scenes. He's like the straight man to it all, and he's like, "I think your wife would look lovely in this." You know, wife. I know her as well as any man in this town.
That's a bit of a sly infidelity joke there.
Yeah, just shows how good Luke Evans is, the way how he like handles scenes like that.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of sly, we passed the Stephen Colbert cameo scene. Considering he is such a huge fan of Middle-earth, I thought it was pretty awesome and that he got a chance to appear in these movies.
Who does Stephen Colbert play?
He's the spy who taps on the door and more spies start following the group.
Oh, is he the one with the iPads?
Yes.
Oh, that kind of reminds me of not that long ago. Stephen Colbert, on his show, he did an interview with Smaug, and they did special effects of Smaug appearing next to Stephen Colbert on his talk show.
That's right, they did.
He was like, "Here's my co-star from The Hobbit."
That was actually pretty damn funny, I will admit. Why are there dwarves coming out of our toilets?
They bring us luck.
I have to say, James Nesbitt's daughters, who play Tilda and Sigrid, they're pretty good in this.
Yeah.
Rod,
what did you think of Luke Evans in the comedic scenes and the way how he kind of like plays it straight?
Yeah, I think it's another example of how good he is in this role, that he doesn't let the humour of the situation change his character or anything. I just think it's a very natural kind of thing too. It doesn't seem forced or anything like that.
Good point.
A dwarvish win, lads.
It's interesting how we see the tool of Smaug's demise being foreshadowed this early on.
But then they quite cleverly trick us out in the next film.
Yeah. The Black Arrow is obviously made to be much larger, but at the same time, the other part of what kills Smaug, the thrush, relaying the warning of having a weak spot under the left wing, that was cut out because here, both Bard and Bane seem to know that Smaug does have a weak patch. That actually cuts Bilbo out of the equation, if you think about it. Do you feel that lessens Bilbo's heroism or his actions in these films?
No, not really.
No, I think there's so much that he does to prove his strengths that it doesn't create any weaknesses that undermine everything that has come before and any of his strengths, really, to be honest.
I feel much the same way, but I do. And to be honest, it would have been difficult at best and awkward at worst if they somehow managed to integrate a talking thrush into the film. Considering that they've established that eagles in these movies don't talk.
Yeah, because we don't actually see any instance of them talking. And the other thing is too, you could say, well, if Bilbo was in their presence and he wore the ring, maybe you'd have a similar thing to the spiders, but that's nothing we see. So it's sort of like animals in this only speak if you're Smaug, or if you are wearing the ring in the presence of certain animals.
That's true. Overall, I think it's one of those things that probably worked well enough in the book, but for the purposes of the film, would have been too jarring to adapt faithfully.
Yeah, you need to sort of establish earlier on in the movie that animals can talk without needing the ring as a device to understand what they're saying. In some ways, that could be a red herring that appears, and people would be like, "Well, how come this bird's talking? We haven't seen any other animals talk without Bilbo wearing the ring in their presence."
True. And the only explanation Tolkien gives us is that because Bard is a descendant of the Men of Dale, he can understand the birds, as though that was an ability that was unique to the men in that region.
Yeah. I guess there's certain levels of severity in terms of things that could be considered bad in a movie, and that's how I view things. To me, there's certain levels. There's minor things that don't really ruin anything, and then there's major things that, if you get enough of those major ones, it can really, really affect the movie overall.
Good point.
Bit of blood.
Those orcs are messy eaters.
Yes.
And I wonder if Tariel feels strongly about that because she's a woodland elf.
That's true, and I don't actually think about it. The wood elves seem to have a bit of a deer and stag motif with them, especially Thranduil. So the sight of desiccated stag corpses should be shocking to her. Do you think it's good that we have Tariel as a more proactive part in the events of this film series?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I think so. To be crude, I think these films can be a bit of a sausage fest at times. So I'm glad we got a strong female character who does go out and she kicks ass, and she's quite an interesting character as well, I think.
It is not our fight.
I think she's interesting in the sense that we get a real sense of what an elf commoner would be like, and in this case, a very young one as well. One that's more impetuous and a little more governed by emotions than some of the older elves are.
Well, yeah, if you call 600 years old young.
Well, yes. I mean, by elven standards, I mean. I also disagree with the notion that Tariel is a Mary Sue on account of her abilities and her romancing with Keeley. I think that's a broad, blanket statement that doesn't apply to her.
No, if she was a Mary Sue, she wouldn't need any help from Legolas. She wouldn't need any help from anyone. She'd walk straight up to the Necromancer and kill him in one hit, and then the story would be over.
Of course.
Right from The Force Awakens.
Sorry, Richard, you seem to have a bit of a bad cough there.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
No matter. I love the scene between Bard and the men of Lake Town realizing that the dwarves' return could mean good tidings for the men of Esgaroth. The tapestry is very ornately designed as well, and I wonder if it's floating around in collector's versions.
Whereas Bard he knows there's a sinister double meaning to the prophecy.
Of course. What I also like is this is actually a prophecy that works. It's not the main focus. It's not the main drive. It's natural human superstition, and that
it's kind of a nice little MacGuffin, isn't it?
In a way, yes. It also repurposes some of J.R.R. Tolkien's poetry as well. The line of "The Lord of Silver Fountains, the King of Carven Stone." In the book, it's more of a celebratory tune as dwarves go out on their quest, but here it takes a more ominous tone, foreshadowing the attack of the dragon.
Well, it reminds me of when they change things that were said by one character in the novels to another character in the film adaptation, and I think that it is a case of being executed quite well, and I think that's another example of what you see in The Lord of the Rings being done.
This bit, I like it that we understand why the Master decides to help the dwarves, in that he does see the obvious political gain of supporting a band of heroes who could kill the dragon. I never thought I'd say this, but I actually kind of like the more political slant of the Lake Town scenes.
Yeah, it's something
even if they do go on. Sorry. You first.
That's okay. It's something that I think is another way to show how different the human element of Lake Town is compared to, say, Gondor or other places as well, Rohan and that kind of thing.
True. If Gondor is, say, medieval Constantinople and Rohan is Anglo-Saxon England, Lake Town is sort of like Dark Ages Venice, in a way, with a northeastern European slant to it.
I haven't actually been to Venice, but I definitely have been there as a video game character. In Assassin's Creed
yes.
2, as Ezio.
Would you say the comparison fits, then, based on what you've seen?
I guess it could fit quite well. I mean, both are areas that are surrounded by water, and I think that's quite an apt comparison. A native of that land might have a different view, of course, and
and of course we welcome anyone of Venetian or Italian background to correct us on that.
Absolutely, I don't mind being corrected on things when I'm wrong, so it's definitely something that I wouldn't mind.
I really like that we get to see Bilbo stand up and advocate for Thorin's good word. It sets up events in the Battle of Five Armies and also shows how far their friendship has come.
This scene reminds me of Christmas.
You're right, actually.
Especially with Balin, is it? Balin.
Yes, Balin. He looks like Father Christmas.
Yeah, there's even an extra in the background behind Bard that looks a bit like Father Christmas.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. I noticed that now.
Yeah, just this scene reminds me very much of Christmas, especially with the setting and the snow.
It seems very Dickensian, doesn't it?
Yes. Absolutely.
And also like Victorian London, there were actually people of colour living in the city at the time, and we also do get a little bit of that in Lake Town. Even though some people had some, and by people I mean racist people, even though they took issue with it, it doesn't. I have to say, it really does not detract from the story in any way, shape, or form. If anything, it only shows that Lake Town, being a city of trade, brings people from all across Middle Earth to live there and to trade.
Yeah, I thought the whole it's politically correct was a absolutely stupid criticism, and it just made no sense whatsoever.
Political correctness is changing the race of a key character to try and give them more focus.
James Bond.
Good point.
I just think that not every character can have a lot of fundamental things about them changed. There's just some characters that were created and written in such a way that you have to honour the way that they were written originally. You can't just change any character to suit whatever you want. But yeah, I don't think there's any issue with showing a person of colour being in this location or anything like that. It's not calling attention to itself. It's not grandstanding in any way, and it doesn't affect anything in the film. It's just a group scene. You have the people of Lake Town, and as I think you've said before, Oscar, it's like a place where a lot of people do trade and that kind of thing. So it's feasible you'd have people of different colours and ethnicities.
Do you know, guys, I didn't even think about it until I heard that criticism that it's just being politically correct, and I'm like, yeah, well, thanks for pointing out something that I didn't even notice in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do, yeah.
Welcome!
Welcome!
Stephen Fry is channeling his QI side, I think, in this scene. Were you guys surprised at the fact that some of the dwarves were left behind on the quest? Most notably, Bofur, Feely, and Keely.
Well, Bofur had a hangover and he passed out drunk, and Philly wants to be with his brother, so it makes sense.
Yeah, there's reasons given in the story as to why that would happen. It's not just done without any sort of explanation or anything that gives you a hint as to why.
I just love the visual of Bilbo walking along with the Lake Town helmets on.
I love it too. Their helmets are so much larger than they're so much larger on the dwarves and Bilbo than they are on the men. I love this exchange between Thorin and Feely, because that's when you realise he is actually Thorin's heir, and showing him pick his little brother over his uncle. It's a heartwarming moment that also shows his strength of character.
It's funny, with this music, for some reason I get a bit of Terry Gilliam, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen vibe in it.
I have actually yet to see Baron Munchausen, actually.
I recommend seeing it. It's an interesting movie, to say the least.
I'll definitely look into it then.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite Terry Gilliam films. In fact, it's the first one of his I ever actually saw.
I love how Bofur's like, oh, my beard is at the time.
I love that bit too.
See, these Hobbit movies aren't all doom and gloom.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we forgot to touch on this earlier, but it's made clear. We're told that Keely was struck with a Morgul arrow. That surprises me because I associate Morgul weaponry with the Nazgul, not common orcs.
Well, for me, I suppose you could infer that occasionally orcs get issued with those weapons because they work so closely with Minas Morgul.
Potentially. In the way I kind of see it is that if it was a Morgul wound, he'd probably be dead or dying much quicker, much sooner. I sort of see it as another orc poison, and then maybe the one that was captured by the elves just wanted to taunt them some more.
Possible.
But at the same time, it also makes the Tariel healing him scene a little more confusing as well. This is what I mean by changes that kind of don't make any sense, in my opinion.
Well, I think the thing is that Keely, if you remember in Fellowship of the Ring when Frodo is being healed by Arwen, From his
Yeah.
perspective, we see her as like an angelic sort of figure that is over him and helping him. And I guess in the moment with Keely and Toriel, it's sort of like that kind of moment where he's seeing her as some angelic being that's healing him. Whereas if it was from someone else's perspective, it might just be, an elf, doing just doing something that seems like a normal healing thing. But to Keely, it's like, this is some angel or some angelic being that is helping me here.
That's actually a good point. So overall, I do think that helps that scene make a little more sense. But still, there are a few instances in this film where I feel like the pacing is deliberately dragging itself, and it was in the healing scene, but it was also in the climax, which I know you guys really liked, but I have personally very mixed feelings for.
I just can't hate these films, to be honest. I just don't see how they could be reviled so much from some people.
I think the hate gets way too intense and completely for the wrong reasons. But I am prepared to listen to other fans if they have something legitimate to point out.
Well, I think quite a few good films get a bit of a bad rap, really. For no reason other than the fact that, and I think in these films' cases, because they're not the same as Lord of the Rings.
Indeed.
And it's like, well, it's not trying to do Lord of the Rings, it's telling the story of the Hobbit.
And even if it's not 100% faithful, you can still recognise the events in the Hobbit story, as well as in the appendices. Yeah. Most notably, Gandalf going to Dol Guldur and confronting the necromancer.
Oh, I love this scene. I think this, as you guys probably know, I'm a huge fan of this scene.
I really like it. I really like the scene too, and I think it's a good way of showing Gandalf being proactive throughout the course of these movies. I cannot agree with the sentiment that these scenes shouldn't have been filmed or written, and that Gandalf should have just reappeared at Erebor when he did in the third film. It's one of those instances which is okay for a shortish book, because you want to ramp up the tension, but in a film with a developed character like Gandalf, you need to show what he's up to.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that if the Lord of the Rings films hadn't existed and these films we see now were just made, I think that they would have done maybe just one movie of The Hobbit, because you can afford to have Gandalf go off and do other stuff and let everything else play out. But because Lord of the Rings came out first, people expect to see Gandalf. Like, otherwise, why are you bringing him back into the story of The Hobbit? You could just cut him out completely and just show everything that the Hobbits do. So, yeah, I just don't know.
I love the camera angles and like the music in this scene, and I like the fact that in this version of the film you get more of Gandalf exploring Dol Guldur.
I completely agree, and there's such even in when he's exploring this seemingly abandoned fortress, everything about it just seems so completely off and ominous that you start to feel the tension yourself and start to get goosebumps.
And I love it when he casts his spells like evil come forth.
That was a nice touch as well. Once again, not going overboard with the magical aspect of Gandalf.
Yeah, Rod, I think it was you who said in the previous films they didn't want to go overboard. They didn't want to be too showy with Gandalf's magic.
Yeah, they didn't want to be too over the top with it, and to have him in every scene he's in where he needs to help someone or attack, that he's doing these outlandish things that you might see in Harry Potter. It was supposed to be a bit more subtle, and, you know, having said that, I can forgive some moments in these Hobbit movies if it seems like his magic powers are shown in a more fuller way than what they have done before, but it still doesn't go into that over-the-top thing of make everything look like there's some big magical thing happening. Like, you know, it's not all over the place and a kaleidoscope of colours, if you will, or anything like that.
Indeed.
Again, like you mentioned Harry Potter, and it kind of reminds me of another criticism where people said Gandalf is a rip-off of Dumbledore.
I will officially stop talking to that person if they ever say that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous, really. It just shows how ignorant that people can be, and I guess you could say, well, if they don't know about Lord of the Rings before seeing Harry Potter, maybe they could, but yeah, I just think that if someone doesn't do their research and find out that's not the case, well, you know, that's on them.
Definitely. What do you guys think of these scenes with Gandalf and Thrain?
I was glad they were put in because, for me, that resolved kind of a plot hole. Well, I'm not sure if plot hole is the right word, but it solves a problem that the theatrical version had, which is what happened to Thrain. But here we actually do find out.
Indeed. And it also takes cues from the background material of The Hobbit. Gandalf actually did enter Dol Guldur and find Thrain, who was in the dungeons of the Necromancer.
Well, there you go.
It's also in that scene that Thrain gives Gandalf the map and key to Erebor. Here, it's implied that they've encountered before, and this is sort of a failed rescue attempt, if you will.
You know, when I first saw this scene, I thought it was Gollum.
Really?
Yeah, obviously it turns out it isn't Gollum, and I was like, who the hell is this?
Mm.
And then when it said it was Thrain, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that was quite a clever little. You know, I like the way how they included his character and they resolved that problem that the theatrical version had, because I never liked the way how they just left it up in the air in the theatrical version, but I'm glad that we do get a resolution to that plot thread here.
I never liked that. I never liked that lack of resolution myself. But it also just goes to show just how deep into his schemes Sauron is. Not only has he captured one of the Dwarven kings and taken his ring, he's also counting on the dwarves getting to Erebor and either getting killed and awakening the dragon, or perhaps even killing the dragon, but still claiming the mountain for his own.
Well, I guess too, he knows that their greed would, once they've gotten back in there, would glue them to that place. And so, you know, they wouldn't want to dare have that place be overrun or to leave it to be overrun.
Indeed. Also get a nice indication of the sort of magic that lies over Dol Guldur when Thrain starts to see the vines start to move.
Very dangerous.
And then Gandalf's like, no, that's just an illusion. But it kind of fits in with Sauron and his title, The Deceiver.
Fantastic point, actually.
Yes, he's a great deceiver.
Also, I forgot, another way that people tend to underestimate Radagast is that without him, Gandalf probably would have been permanently imprisoned or killed, if not for Radagast summoning Galadriel, Elrond, and Saruman to their aid.
Was the ring Thrain had one of the great 7 Dwarf Lord rings?
It was, in fact.
Oh, so he must have inherited that then from his ancestors.
He did, yes. I think 3 of the dwarven rings were taken by Sauron and his orcs, and the other 4 were consumed by dragonfire.
Now I'm a bit rusty, but it's only the rings that the elves have that aren't sort of connected to the one ring plus the others.
I think it's that the 3 elven rings have been kept out of Sauron's grasp, and that they're able to use their rings for protecting their realms. Gandalf actually carries one of the 3 rings, and he needs that ring to rekindle his heart and his courage, something that would prove very useful for his long journeys.
Yeah.
Some people had issue with the scene of the dwarves giving up on their attempts to break into the mountain. Do you guys feel the same way?
No, not really. Because in one way I can. Sorry, excuse me. I can understand their frustration.
I think it also thematically this actually links into a scene from earlier, in that even in the midst of darkness and despair, there's always hope.
That's
and the scene I'm referring to is when Bilbo actually emerges from the canopy of Mirkwood and is surrounded by beautiful blue butterflies. His spirits are lifted.
Yeah, I definitely
and in
agree.
In this scene, when even though the dwarves, it looks to them like their mission has failed. What really happened was that they just needed to wait a little longer. They needed to persevere, if you will.
And for me, this makes me like Bilbo, because you see the gear is in his head turning, and he's the one who figures out that it's not the sun, it's the moon.
Indeed. And that's actually another point that I just remembered. It literally is the last sunbeam of Durin's Day that illuminates the keyhole. This is different from what we've seen with the Mines of Moria, in which it's moonlight that reveals the Dwarven Gates. Here it's a similar principle. The last moon of Durin's Day illuminates the keyhole. It's a change that I kind of understand, but also am sort of about. I understand why they did it, and I believe there is consistency in it. But at the same time, I do find it very noticeable.
Yeah, I like this whole thing, how they give up, and it's another example of how, in life things happen that can make you lose all hope, but sometimes you just have to persevere, because the moment you give up could have been that last final moment before the breakthrough happened. And if you give up at that time, you won't know for certain. So I think hope is this thing that it may not lead to success, but as long as you have it, it means that you're more open to success happening. And I like how
Exactly,
Bilbo,
Rod.
yeah, and I like how Bilbo represents that, because he is that hope that doesn't give up and comes through for them.
Exactly. Plus, he is the one with the map at hand, and he's able to recall Elrond's words about the last light and the thrush knocking on the stone.
Yeah.
He remembers the key words, when the thrush knocks.
Another example of why he was definitely someone to bring on this journey, because if they hadn't, if he decided to stay home, or along the way before this point, if he had decided to give up, or Thorin said go away and he did forever, then when they got here they wouldn't have realised this.
Exactly.
The last moon of autumn. See, Bilbo figured it out.
Also, this leads to something, I think, do you like this bit with the key almost being lost and Thorin saving it at the last second?
Symbolism.
It is symbolic, actually. Thorin coming into his own, as a potential king. Speaking of symbolism, a little later on we see Thorin's frame silhouetted against a statue of his grandfather. And he insists that he is not Thror, he is not his grandfather, despite the signs tending otherwise.
It's kind of funny when they open up the door and they all go in. I thought the film was going to fade to black and end then when I first saw this.
Yeah.
I think that would have been completely unacceptable. I knew they wouldn't end it here because they already showed us the inside of Erebor as well as bits of the dragon. So I had a feeling that that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, but imagine if they did that. That would have been like the biggest cock tease ever.
Well, we do kind of get a cock tease in our own way with the cliffhanger later on, but
yeah, we do.
What you suggested about ending here would have been far worse.
I think it would have been, yeah. It would have been just...
Even
really.
I wouldn't stand for that, and I'm
No,
one of the biggest defender.
I think I would have been annoyed, and I'm glad the film kept going and gave us quite a good climax, I must say.
Do you think the Arkenstone functions well as a MacGuffin to motivate the dwarves to get back to Erebor and reclaim their home from Smaug?
I think so, because I'm a bit rusty on this, but I believe the traditional meaning of MacGuffin is a plot device which doesn't necessarily matter to the plot. But over time, a different kind of MacGuffins have happened in some films, and therefore the meaning and perception and functions of MacGuffins have changed over time. So, yeah, I think if you think of it that way, the Arkenstone can be a perfectly good MacGuffin.
Oh, there you have it.
Yeah, when I was in film school, we had like an entire module talking about MacGuffins.
Nice.
In a little bit, we have a reference to Athelas being the thing that cures Keely. Can't speak today.
Yeah. It's also a nice callback to the Fellowship of the Ring too, with Frodo being healed and Aragorn telling Sam what to get.
Yeah, in fact, some people might say that it's probably too similar to Fellowship of the Ring. I think Athelas is, from what I remember, Athelas is actually an all-healing plant from minor sicknesses to mortal wounds. So, regardless of what affliction Keely is suffering from, Athelas would cure him. And because it's a weed, and weeds are found all over Middle-earth, it's not unreasonable to assume that even the Lakemen must know of it.
Yeah. I don't know, if people are wanting that to be a criticism and say it's just like in Fellowship of the Ring, it's like, well, it's not like they're introducing an element that wasn't in this world. It's not like they're saying, yeah, here's a steroid.
Yeah, that would have felt pretty out of place as well.
Exactly. It's using things within the same universe, but using them more than once. And I don't get this idea that you can only do one thing in a series of movies only once if it's something that can be used more than once. It's like saying, no, you can't have any other scene in the entire movies where someone is healed with an Athelas. It has to be something else. You can't do that more than once, otherwise you're just copying.
I suppose so.
No. How dare they do something that's consistent to the universe of this series?
Yeah.
I'm reading up on the information on Athelas right now. It suggests that only the Rangers of the North retains this knowledge. But at the same time, these dwarves meet all sorts of people, so they must have picked up the knowledge at some point.
Exactly, yeah, and I quite like this scene where
Azog.
is it? No, not Azog. The dwarf with the beard.
Thrain?
Balin.
Balin, yeah, Balin.
Balin.
I love the scene where Balin is basically saying, "Now, Bilbo, I don't know for sure if there's a dragon down there, but if you do happen to find one, good luck."
You're right, that was a nice bit of another way in which Ken Stott was able to shine as Balin in more ways
Yeah.
than one.
Yeah, I like him and his performance. He definitely brings an element of warmth to the role of Balin, and when you watch Fellowship of the Ring from now on in the Mines of Moria, knowing that he died and remembering how he was in these movies, I think it amplifies, a bit of the sadness about it all.
I completely agree, because it was difficult for me to get sad at when I first watched Fellowship of the Ring, but when I rewatched that scene after The Hobbit, I actually did get legitimately teary-eyed.
Yeah, and I think that's when prequels can really do a great job, is if they can do that kind of thing, and I definitely think that's an example of where a prequel does.
Because
Yeah.
did you guys know that Gloin, his dead body, appears in Fellowship of the Ring in the Mines of Moria?
Oh, no, that's not Gloin. I believe that's Ori, the little dwarf.
Oh, right, yeah, of course it is, yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, I just cringed at the way Thrain was killed by Sauron and the Wilhelm scream was used. I thought that was probably...
Yeah.
That was a very poor placement of it.
And of course we get another cool Azog scene, and I love the way how Gandalf uses his magic to make them back off.
I love that bit
I think Gandalf is a pure badass in this film particularly.
You're right. I do appreciate that we get to see Gandalf tested to his very limits, and
then he sees the army assembling, and he's like, "Oh shit!"
But worse than that, we see that even at a fraction of his power, just how strong Sauron is.
Yeah, not even the great Grey Pilgrim, Mithrandir, can stand up to him. Rod, what do you think of the Sauron reveal scene?
I liked it. I remember when I saw it in the theatrical version, I had chills, and it was great to see. And I just think that it's an awesome way to... Well, if you've seen Lord of the Rings, we've already seen him, but so from that perspective, it's a good way to reintroduce the character to us. But in terms of its being before, it's a great way to be a first reveal for Sauron.
Yeah,
Exactly.
especially if you watch these films in chronological order.
Yeah.
They build up towards Sauron's return in An Unexpected Journey, and here, this is where you really see him in his raw form.
And Oscar, I think you said Gandalf could fight him if he wanted to, but he doesn't kill people.
No. I believe what I said is that the rules that the Valar gave him is that he cannot use his powers to meet might with might.
Oh.
In Valinor, maybe he could have been strong enough to defeat Sauron, but as an Isari, with only a limited set of powers and abilities, he cannot meet Sauron's threats with his own magic.
Yeah. I love how that was like a little tug-of-war match, but then Sauron's like, "No, enough of this, I'm going to disintegrate your staff."
Exactly. Do you think Sauron's reveal actually takes away from the menace of Smaug?
No, well, maybe a little bit, but I just love the fact that, based on what I know and I've read about Sauron, and the fact that he's a sneaky deceiver who works behind the scenes, this feels, for me personally, at the very least, very consistent with his character and something that he would do, and the fact that he would reveal himself only at the last minute as well. That's basically very Sauron-esque.
Yeah, I don't think it undermines anything about Smaug, to be honest, and even if it did, I think it's in a minor way anyway. It's not something that would ruin the whole film, and Smaug has his own kind of threat to him. He's not as powerful as what Sauron is, but he definitely is a formidable foe, and I think that something that would have made Smaug less threatening would be if, he got killed at the end of this. Because,
Really?
like if this is where it ended, then basically, in a way, it's like, well, that threat's over. So what's the threat now of the third movie? And I mean, at the start of the third movie, yes, he does get killed, and then the rest of the movie, it's about the battle. But that because of the title, that it's going to be about the battle. So I just think that the way that they handled Smaug in this was a good way to go, considering the mandate that was brought down by Warner Brothers too.
I forget, what mandate was that?
Well,
I believe that was to use Smaug more, as in, we see him on the posters for the Battle of Five Armies, and the impression some people got was that he would be in the film a lot, when really he's in one scene.
Yeah, it's just one of those things.
For what it's worth, I absolutely love the build-up towards Smaug's revelation and the look of terror and just absolute fear on Bilbo's face as he realizes just how big this dragon is, and as he starts to wake up.
And Smaug's been asleep for a long time, and he doesn't like to be disturbed.
Exactly.
I mean, he's basically some grumpy guy who's been rudely woken up from a long sleep, and there's no coffee. That's like times 200 million.
That's one way of putting it.
That is.
I think we can both agree that the visualization of Smaug is spot on. It's visually he's perfect, I think.
Wasn't there some issue of what type of dragon he was too? I remember hearing and reading about.
You're right. In fact, that's another thing. Originally, and you can see this in the theatrical cut of An Unexpected Journey, he was going to be a four-legged dragon with wings, but based on Benedict Cumberbatch's more reptilian performance, which involves a lot of crawling around on his arms, they changed it so that Smaug's wings became his forearms as well. And I have to say, I didn't like the change at first, but I've grown accustomed to it over time. Because of the way Smaug slithers and lunges about, it does feel more serpentine that way.
Yeah, it's
what do you
quite
guys
a
think?
good thing. I think it's a good thing, really. Yeah, I don't have any issues with it.
And you, Richard?
This whole scene makes me feel very tense, and I don't know if you guys agree with this, but I think the effects are so good. It looks like Smaug is actually there.
I feel the same way as well. That's what I meant by perfect visualization. He looks and feels like he's there.
And it's kind of strange because when I first saw this in the cinema, I wasn't that impressed with Smaug.
Really?
But seeing this on the small screen and on my personal home entertainment system with a good surround sound and a good HD TV, I was able to sort of fully take in Smaug, and I was able to get into like him and Benedict Cumberbatch's performance a lot more.
That's interesting, because I remember my jaw dropping as soon as Smaug emerged from the gold. We have a pretty big cinema where I live, so I was taken in by his enormity.
Yeah, but I think it might have been an issue with the cinema because I saw it in HD IMAX, where
Really?
Yeah, where it was running at 48 frames per second.
That might have been the issue then.
Yeah.
I think we've reached... There's a consensus now that's... Sorry.
Yeah, whereas my home entertainment system, it runs at a standard rate. And therefore the visuals are able to sort of like be conveyed better.
Generally speaking, I don't think the experiments of 48 frames per second worked out at all.
I think it should have been kept as a background experimentation. You know what I mean? Like they could have just kept on working on it, because it feels to me it's not ready yet. It's kind of like a prototype of something being released to the public instead of the actual proper thing.
Yeah, I feel as though personally, my home entertainment system was able to. It had more than enough. It's got more than enough tech and specs to be able to run the film fine. It doesn't. My home entertainment system doesn't need 48 frames per second. So, I think that's why I much prefer seeing Smaug on a slightly smaller screen.
Of course. Plus, it has to be said, Benedict Cumberbatch's portrayal of Smaug. Yeah, there's no. Everything that can be said has been said. He is Smaug in these scenes.
Yeah, I can't even tell it's him because he disappears completely into the role.
A lot of people thought there was a lot of voice modulation, but it turns out, if you look at the making-of clips, he really did make his voice go that deep and guttural for the role.
Yeah, that's how much this film impressed me. I liked Benedict Cumberbatch in this role.
Indeed. But
whereas usually he just kind of plays Sherlock or a variation of Sherlock, but here he actually does feel like he's putting on a different performance.
Good point.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see in Doctor Strange what he's like.
I'm more excited for his next motion capture performance as Shere Khan, the tiger, in Warner Brothers' Jungle Book. That to me seems like inspired casting.
Now, I think some people have said, it doesn't make any sense that Bilbo could find the Arkenstone so quickly. And I'm like, well, if there was like a 5 or 10 minute sequence of Bilbo poking around through the gold trying to find the Arkenstone, would that not have slowed the film right down and just made the pacing go at a snail's pace?
Quite.
Absolutely, it would have done. Would have made the movie feel like it stopped in its tracks. And the thing is, the Arkenstone is a unique jewel amongst gold coins and other trinkets, and it glows. So I think it's quite easy for Bilbo to spot it. So I don't think we needed a 5 or 10 minute sequence, as you say, Richard, to show that he's searching for it.
Indeed.
We already had a couple of scenes like that anyway, so...
They were enough, and he could have been searching for hours before waking the dragon.
Exactly, yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
But no, some people, they need a clock to show the passage of time.
They do, and I think some of it might be those who watch these reviewers that basically bullet point things from a movie and plot holes and all that, continuity errors that people like to point out. And I think some of that gets subconsciously planted in people's minds when they're watching a movie, so they might feel, hang on, how did this happen, or why did this happen, or where is this, and what's that,
I see what you mean, but it's interesting because I remember notable YouTube critics like Jeremy Jahns or Chris Stuckman, they actually liked Desolation of Smaug. But I do know a few, such as Filmmaster Adam, who really cannot stand it.
Yeah, and well, to be fair, they're entitled to their opinions, I guess.
Yeah, I feel the same way. For me, I think the amount of hate leveled towards its flaws, and it does have its flaws, but the amount of hate that gets leveled towards it is disproportionate to what's actually wrong with it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I can agree with that, yeah.
I do honestly feel like the subplot of Bard getting captured by the authorities does slow the film down rather pointlessly.
But I do like the line where the daughter says, is the dragon going to kill us? But Bard's like, no, not if I kill it first.
That's a good
You're right.
line.
I mean, as usual, Bard's able to... Luke Evans' Bard is able to really keep me at least fully invested in the action.
Yeah, because in the next film we do get a great opening action sequence.
Indeed.
So yeah, you know how this film ends on a cliffhanger. I do have my kind of a few gripes with it, but the next film more than makes up for that, so it doesn't really bother me personally on the whole.
Fair enough.
Yeah, for me, it's a case
But
of it could be an issue when you're first watching this, but future viewings when you might be watching Battle of Five Armies straight after, it's like the movie's right there to watch. You don't have to wait another year to see it.
I just realised Bard's son looks a bit like Ron Weasley.
Oh yeah. I actually like the inclusion of Bard's son because Bane is legitimately the very same Bane who becomes King of Dale after Bard dies. I thought it was a very neat way to include future descendants of Bard's lineage who would rule after him.
Yeah.
Plus, making him a family man does make him more likable.
Very true. It adds another element to him.
I know you have problems with the subplot, Oscar, but I like the way how the captain of the guard says, "You're under arrest," but Bard's like, "No, sod off," and he belts him in the mouth.
That was a good shot. I definitely see that. The scary thing is, as large and powerful as Smaug is, he actually isn't the greatest dragon that has ever lived in Middle-earth.
Oh yeah, I think I heard about that, and there was another one that was even greater than him.
The largest Tolkien ever wrote about was Ancalagon the Black. So large he was that when he eventually fell, mountain ranges shattered where he fell. He was basically... If you could picture Godzilla, I think Ancalagon was larger than Godzilla. My wings, a hurricane!
But yeah, I don't. I feel as though maybe the subplot of Bard getting arrested wasn't needed in one way, but it does sort of add tension to the next film when he has to break out of prison.
True. By the way, I really love this one last exchange from Smaug, saying that he would much rather that he is tempted to watch the Arkenstone corrupt Thorin. I thought that was a great way of showing the sadistic monster inside of him, the inner psycho, you might say.
You know, when I first saw this, I began to wonder if maybe Smaug has worked with Sauron. Maybe.
I'm tempted to wonder that myself. He's at least as old as the very end of the First Age, and Sauron was still at large by then. And the implication here is that Smaug is aware of Sauron's return, and he might even decide to join with him, just for the sake of wreaking death and destruction. That's dark. That's really freaking dark, I have to say.
It's funny, you look at characters like Smaug, and you look at characters like Gollum, and even though ultimately we know that Gollum isn't... Well, he kind of is redeemed in the end, but not fully. But you look at Smaug and you think to yourself, this is a villain that can't be redeemed. Like, he's just not going to have any semblance of care for humanity or anything. He's just, one of those evil characters.
I feel the same way.
Yeah, and same with Sauron, of course. He might feign, as he does in the past, about being a good, not being
reformed.
Exactly. But ultimately, even he proves that he's not.
Even Sauron proves that even though he might feign being reformed, he is still bad to the core.
He's bad to the bone.
I figured you might pick up on that. Even though I like seeing these prosthetic orcs, and I like seeing Bard's children put up a good fight, I do feel like this does actively slow the pace down to a considerable degree. They're just lucky that Legolas and Tauriel showed up when they did.
I think our little game ends here. I just realised that scene was kind of a callback to Unexpected Journey when Bilbo got into a battle of wits with Smeagol.
I don't think it's really a callback, because both scenes are structured and written almost identical to their book counterparts. I'd say they're more parallels than callbacks, really.
Oh yeah, I think that might have been the word I was looking for.
By the way, you like this bit, Richard? The scene with the orc getting decapitated by Legolas.
I think it's such a cool and at the same time funny visual. It just feels consistent with Legolas's character for him to do something like that.
Oh, I just find it way too ridiculous. The way the orc is lunged into the air and decapitated. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It just wasn't my thing.
What did you think of it, Rod?
Well, yeah, I can sort of understand where Oscar's coming from. At the same time, I can't help but like that moment too. It's, it might be sort of a bit grotesque, but I like the idea of him decapitating the orc and then the orc's head staying on his blades for a couple of seconds before he releases. And
it just, we know Legolas just can't resist showing off, and Orlando Bloom is just having an absolute blast playing the role again.
Yeah, a lot of people may criticize Orlando Bloom's acting. I think his performance is only ever as good as his script or his director, as evidenced by The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Kingdom of Heaven, and I think the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
I would say Black Hawk Down as well.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Black Hawk Down when he played Private Blackburn, the one who falls out of the helicopter.
Oh yeah, almost forgot about that. Thank you.
Actually, to diverge for a second, he is rumoured to be in the next Pirates of the Caribbean as Will Turner again.
I'm sure I'll see that when it comes out to review it.
Yeah.
By the way, how did you guys feel about Thorin turning his blades to Bilbo? I actually thought it was a very bone-chilling way of showing just how the gold was starting to get to him.
Yeah, that's where I think the gold takes on a quality that the ring has, except of course in this instance it's more closely tied to Thorin, and it's like the gold sickness is infecting him. It's like an airborne virus that even though he's not physically touching the gold, he's still influenced by its presence around him.
You could say it's the strain of madness that Elrond alluded to.
Exactly. And it sort of corrupts his mind a bit too.
Definitely. By the way, fun bit of trivia. Richard Armitage really hated having to fight and act with that cloak on him. So when they set it up, so he asked for an excuse to lose it, and Jackson wrote it so that it gets caught on fire and he has to discard it.
Oh, that's fair enough.
That's a nice little...
So that's why I like it, because...
It's my understanding that they didn't have a set-out climax, so they kind of had to make it up as they went along, and the actors weren't even sure what they were filming, because most of it would be put in post-production in CGI.
You're right. We'll touch on that in a bit, but right now we're at the scene with Tauriel healing Keely.
Yeah.
I don't think it's at all consistent, because elves do retain the ability to heal as long as they don't engage in too much killing in their lives. I believe it works because not only is Tauriel still young, but she hasn't killed as many creatures as Legolas and Thranduil will have in their lives.
Yeah, I guess the thing is too, like the camera angle when she is glowing, it's his POV that we're seeing, whereas there was another angle from a different side of her where it wasn't him looking at her, and she was starting to do the healing. So I guess you could say that in his eyes, she's like an angelic being, that the same way that Arwen was to Frodo when he was being healed.
I feel much the same way, and I believe that's what makes the scene mostly work for what it is. I love these moments of complete silence. There's no music, there's just the empty halls of Erebor, and every whisper sounds much louder than it should do.
I love the visual of Thorin turning around and seeing Smaug again for the first time in a long time.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. That was these two locking eyes for the first time in over 60 years.
Yeah, it's like you.
Yes.
It's funny, that reminds me of a moment in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 where Freddy sees Nancy again for the first time since they encountered each other in the first Nightmare on Elm Street. Because he sort of goes, you, and recognises her, and she does too, of course.
Mm.
So has Smaug essentially been asleep for about 60 years then?
Very likely, yes. The implication is that he hadn't been seen flying around the mountain for 60 years.
And that reminds me of a line that Thorin says a bit later on, which is, "You've grown fat and slow in your dotage."
I think that's pretty much the one indication we had. That's because Smaug has been dormant for so long. He's not as quick on his feet as he used to be.
Yeah, and you have to remember, dragons are not humans or elves or whatever else. I guess their biology is, well, it quite literally is vastly different to us. And
True.
Maybe, and I think I read somewhere in mythology in general, dragons can sleep for a long time without needing to sustain themselves.
You're correct about that.
And well, Smaug's a dragon, so. And it's like I said, he had that rude awakening after being asleep for almost a century. So he's like, and he doesn't like to be woken up, and there's no coffee.
I also thought it was a very bone-chilling and bold move to show these dead dwarves in one of the Erebor halls.
It reminds me of what's it called? That Roman city that got destroyed by
Pompeii.
Pompeii,
Right.
yeah. It's like the people of Pompeii who have like been burnt into like kind of like blackened statues by the volcano Vesuvius.
I think that's exactly what it is, man. That these dwarves were roasted alive, or if not roasted alive, then they suffocated and were mummified over the years.
And then Thorin's like, "Oh, we're not going to let that fly. No way. We're going to take this bugger down."
From a character's perspective, seeing his dead kin, you can definitely see that as the impetus for trying to kill Smaug the way he did. Rod, what do you think of it?
Sorry, what was that, Oscar?
We were talking about the dead dwarves in this scene and how it gives Thorin the motivation to try and kill Smaug.
Yeah, it's like that really determination that he needed, the push, the extra push to just go forward with it.
Yes, I feel much the same way. On the whole, I just think audiences really underestimate these dwarves. They call them bumbling, they call them stupid, they call them retarded, and try to use that as an indictment as to why Smaug doesn't try to kill them quickly.
Well, the way I see it, they've got Thorin Oakenshield leading them.
And to me, I kind of see it as Smaug almost toying with the dwarves, the way he says, "Flee for your lives."
Yeah,
That gives me the impression that he's toying with them.
Yeah, kind of like the way how a house cat toys with its prey.
As a cat owner, I completely relate to that sentiment.
Because cats don't eat mice half the time.
Not often.
So yeah, Smaug is a giant cat and the dwarves are the mice.
Pretty much.
Well, yeah, I mean,
It's crazy.
I think it's crazy to think that all villains should just have the straightaway inclination to kill on sight. You know, I think it's a bit silly to expect every villain in every movie to kill its enemies on sight. You know, what's not to say that some enemies like to basically toy with who they're against and who they're going to kill. You know, Freddy does in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Freddy doesn't kill everyone straight away as soon as they turn up in the dream world. He likes to play with them for a while before he does it.
True.
So there's precedence in other franchises and universes of fiction for villains to toy with their characters. So why not make Smaug do that?
It's also in sharp contrast to the orcs, who really do just want to kill you on sight. In particular, we have Bolg, who really does give Legolas a run for his money.
He does, yeah. And he makes Legolas bleed, and I don't think it's Legolas's pride being wounded or anything like that. I think it's more the fact that he knows how dangerous these orcs are, and he has to kill them.
Indeed. It's also crazy to remember that Orlando Bloom was pretty much acting against either a stunt double or nothing in these scenes. Not really sure what he was fighting against. Which I think goes to show how adaptable he is as an actor.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, wouldn't it be interesting if they had a dummy that the actor gets to just, you know, punch and kick, and then the dummy gets replaced later with whatever. You know, I wonder if they've used that in any movies, you know, like in general, I mean.
Good point.
I love the line from Thorin, which is, if this is to end in fire, then we will burn together.
I love that line as well. It's actually my favourite part of the Ed Sheeran song. I know you don't like it, but I thought that gave it an extra element of coolness. Even if it didn't make up for much in your eyes.
That's fair enough. Was it this point where Smaug is chasing after the company, where they began to make the climax up as they went along?
Yes, it is actually. I believe they were at a point in which they couldn't use the Lake Town climax. The attack on Lake Town for the climax. So Jackson had to make up a cliffhanger climax for the Desolation of Smaug, and he had to make it up pretty much on his feet.
Well, I would not have known that. I would not have known that if I hadn't read that in the trivia section.
No, me neither.
Just goes
And
to show that
here's
the
something
end
that's
result
also
is still pretty good.
True. I mean, it's clearly shot. It's got choreography. It has flow and dynamic, even if it does seem to go on.
Good.
Even if it does seem to go on for a fair long while. My real issue with this is that sometimes it does seem to err more on the side of ridiculous than awesome, like Thorin balancing on Smaug's nose. I do like the way he taunts the dragon, goading him into using his fire.
I love the fight scene between Legolas and Bolg.
I think this movie
Although I will
has a lot
say-
of good fight scenes.
Oh yes. Although I will say this, don't lean up against the pillars. You'd be char-grilled in an instant.
Fire doesn't act that way.
Yeah, that's the thing. I know suspension of disbelief and physics tend to go in opposite directions in movies, but that bit always just sort of took me out from time to time. But in the end, I agree. For a scene that was pretty much being made up as they went along, it does feel like a mostly planned out climax.
Just goes to show. Well, this is completely total opinion, but I begin to wonder if Guillermo del Toro would have been able to handle that, because he's a perfectionist director who likes setup, preparation, and I wonder if he would have been able to pull that off the way Peter Jackson did.
I believe Peter Jackson is a perfectionist as well. He likes to plan things out, and he likes to make sure all of the set pieces are executed the way they should be. But
That's true.
In this case,
that's true. But I think Del Toro, he wouldn't have been able to kind of like away from what he planned out.
And let's put it this way: if Del Toro was still attached, the studio would have still called for a trilogy, and I don't think there would have been anything he would have done to change that.
That's true.
Well, yeah, at the end of the day, you've got the hierarchy of the studio is the boss of the overall thing, the studio is the boss of the producer is the boss of the director is basically, making all the decisions for all the departments and that kind of thing. So it's sort of like some people think that a director has so much power they can fire producers when it's the other way around.
I'm in the same boat as well. The producer and the executive producer owns the film, while the director is sort of like the captain on deck, if you will. It's kind of in the same way that an admiral may commands a fleet, but a captain commands a ship.
Yeah, it's like...
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think some people put too much power in... Well, they think the director has too much power, or has a lot of power, when really, in a lot of ways, the director is the guidance, the one that things get filtered to. You've got the heads of the departments which go to the director for, they want to know what's required of them, and they work that way. But you don't see a director basically having full control over a studio. Like a studio.
Only exceptions like Steven Spielberg can have that right.
Yeah, well, I mean, the studio sort of, that they sort of, he's got enough experience to sort of sway the studios themselves.
Quite. I will say, I'm not a fan of the way the molten gold looks in this film. Granted, I haven't actually seen what molten gold looks like, but the way it moves feels just too fluid. I feel like I'm not seeing real gold, I'm seeing an effect. Which is in contrast to almost everything else, especially Smaug, who I see as a character, not an effect.
I like how Thorin basically takes charge and he figures out how to lure a Smaug into a trap. And another line, it'll only take a jiffy. We don't have a jiffy.
I love that bit too. A nice bit of comedy to lighten the otherwise very dark mood.
Yeah.
And you have to remember as well, Smaug is a CGI effect. These actors, when they originally did the film, they were reacting to nothing.
Indeed.
apart from maybe like a tech crew person just waving a stick around or something like that. So the fact that they were able to do it so well, I think, just shows how good actors they are.
And the reason why I don't like the CGI in the Star Wars prequels is because it never feels like the actors are in the moment, like they're reacting to it organically. Whereas in here, I feel as though the actors are giving their 110%. And so I can believe I can believe the situation because of their acting and their performances.
Well, I think too you've got the directing style of Peter Jackson versus George Lucas too, because I've heard a lot of reports of George Lucas being more comfortable when he's not working with actors. He seems to be more comfortable in the editing or the post-production side of films, and just wants to get the shooting done as much, as without much hassle. Which, when you look at A New Hope, back when it was first filmed, you had the sandstorms disrupting production and all that kind of stuff. So, and I think maybe Peter Jackson might be a bit more hands-on with his directors in discussing things or giving them action. So that might have something to do with the differences between how actors in the prequel Star Wars react to things that aren't there versus how these actors in this react to things that aren't there.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because from what I've heard, George Lucas is very much a director who's like, act it as I wrote it, and he won't give his actors that much advice.
In contrast to Jackson, who really does help out his actors and allow them to provide their own input at any opportunity.
Yeah.
Everyone says he went full George Lucas, when the reality is certainly not the case. I could write an essay on how they are not the same director in style and execution, but I'll spare you the details until later. Only suffice it to say, he gave it his all, while Lucas was pretty much on autopilot when it came to his production and his actors.
I think it's important when you're a director that you have to obviously have that authority about yourself, but you also need to have that ear that's open to suggestions from the actors and that kind of thing. And then it's up to you as a director to filter that information and make the decision, the final call, on whether you think that's appropriate or not. And Peter Jackson definitely is that kind of director. He'll listen to his actors. If they come up with something that he feels fits and is a good change or is a good addition, he'll accept it. He won't just close his eyes on it and say things like, no, you'll do it exactly like this is. He's very open to that. But if it's something he doesn't like, he just won't use it. But at least he listens.
Indeed. I am not fond of the way they try to incapacitate Smaug with the molten gold and the dwarven statue of King Thror. I thought that even though it was thematically interesting to see Smaug overwhelmed with the thing he cherishes most, it still made me feel very weird just watching it.
You have to like the symbolism though, because it's a statue of Thror, I think.
Yes.
And he gets overcome by an old enemy of his in some ways.
And I believe, Rod, you really like this visual of Smaug emerging from the mountain, showering gold upon land.
Yeah, and I also want to point out too that, in a way, it's a bit of a sacrifice on Thorin's part to even set this up, because, it's like defiling a statue of, like a picture of your grandparents or something, Like if you were to just find a picture of your grandparents and draw on it or deface it or destroy it. And in a way, Thorin is sacrificing the statue of Thror and, using it against Smaug, thinking it might actually do something to destroy him or things like that.
Good point. But as we can see right now, it just made him mad.
I think the way how Smaug moves around a little bit, he's a bit like a cat. The way how he stalks along.
He is, in a way. It's sort of that fusion of cat-like reflexes as well as a very reptilian mode of moving.
Yeah.
And when all is said and done, whether you love or hate the cliffhanger, I will say it was effective. It made me excited for the next part, and it also made me feel, wow, that was an ending.
And I just remember too, you know, the thing about how in the next movie, Smaug is dealt with, you know, relatively quickly. It just reminds me of Return of the Jedi, how, you know, Empire Strikes Back ends with Han Solo in Carbonite, and then, you know, it's not like he's in Carbonite for the whole half of Return of the Jedi. They do deal with that quite quickly before it gets into the story proper.
Fair point.
So in a way, getting to Smaug at the start of the third part and getting rid of him relatively quickly is just sort of like, well, you know, he is a threat, and we've seen a lot of him in the previous two. So, you know, why not deal with him now at the start instead of dragging it out another hour or so before he gets destroyed?
I suppose so. I just kind of feel like maybe the reception of both Battle of Five Armies and Desolation would have been better if they showed Smaug being defeated in part 2, giving the battle a little more focus and perhaps even maybe more pathos as well.
Yeah, but definite
Even
alternative.
Even though you guys make pretty good cases as to why this cliffhanger does work, especially when you watch all the films back to back, I just sort of wonder if in the moment it would have made Desolation feel more like a complete standalone film, which is what I kind of feel like An Unexpected Journey was. It was a standalone adventure film with hints towards further adventures about Bilbo finding his courage and Thorin finding his appreciating Bilbo's acts of courage and bravery.
So when I look at An Unexpected Journey, I definitely see a movie that I think is a really good one, and, you know, I just think if people think that that's a terrible movie, I just can't really see.
No, I can't relate to that feeling either. I will be the one to say some nice things about Icy Fire, because I love I love 5 out of 6 of the Middle of Earth closing songs. This is the only one I only just kind of sort of like. I know why he was chosen. It was because Katie Jackson, PJ's daughter, was a fan of his music and wanted him to write a song for the film.
I love Smaug's final line. I am fire. I am death.
That was a great closing line as well.
And then when it cuts to black, I'm like, ah. But then I do remember.
But it's a good kind of isn't it?
Yeah, but then I do remember that, you know, we do get to see that pay off eventually in the next film.
True.
So
what
yeah,
do you think? Sorry, Richard, you first.
What do I think of? What were you going to say?
I was going to ask Rod what he thinks of Icy Fire by Ed Sheeran, because I know you're not too keen on it, Rich.
Oh, by all means, Rod can answer that first if he likes.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this song. I think the Neil Finn one from Unexpected Journey is better, as well as the one that Billy Boyd sings too. So.
Yeah, for me, the song is kind of jarring because, like, the film ends on such a dark note, and then you say, "Oh, I see fire," and it's like, what? It just feels like out of place to me.
I think there is an undercurrent of darkness to it, but I think the way Sheeran sings it just feels too modern, and it doesn't have the folk musical charm of Billy Boyd and Neil Finn songs.
Yeah. So far, for me personally, Neil Finn's song is my favourite one out of these films. Well,
I think it's
not the entire series, but, you know, my favourite one out of the Hobbit films.
I feel the exact same way, and I'm always baffled as to why people have mixed opinions of it. I thought it was wonderful. I can see Billy Boyd's song as being more emotional, all things considered, but I find the Neil Finn song more inspiring.
Yeah, I can agree with that. My opinion on this film hasn't really changed. I think it's a much better film. if you watch the extended edition, it's just a really, really good film that gets maybe a little bit too much hate. I like the new locations, I like the acting, I like the cast, I like the inclusion of new characters. It's an epic. It's a chapter in a long running story, and if you take it on its own and just see it in the next part of the Hobbit story, then, without comparing it to Lord of the Rings, then, it works fine in that regard. I mean, it shouldn't be compared to Lord of the Rings because, as I said, it's not trying to be Lord of the Rings. It's telling the story of the Hobbit.
I feel very much the same way, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. Rog, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'd just like to say for my final thoughts on this movie is the extended version is much better, and I like that things such as Thrain are actually, included, and that story is sort of concluded as well. And I just don't think this movie is as terrible as some make it out to be. I like Toriel, I like her introduction, I like what she does, and the love triangle thing, while it might have been a studio mandated thing, and while some people might see that as a love triangle, I basically see it as Legolas has fondness for Toriel, but that doesn't mean that he loves her in a romantic way. And, the scene where she sees her talking to Keely, it's not a look of, oh, the person I love is talking to a race that I hate. It's, why is she talking to a dwarf for? We shouldn't be talking to them because they're our enemy. What could she possibly be talking to him about that would warrant sticking around to hear what he has to say, kind of thing. So I think in that instance, it just alerts Legolas to the fact that Toriel, there's something going on between her and Killy the dwarf. And if some people see that as a love triangle, well, I don't know what to say to that, but I don't.
No, I don't see it as a love triangle either, because for me, it's more kind of like subtly hinted at. And as you said, when Legolas looks at Killy and Toriel with that look, it's more like, why is she talking to him? And it feels to me as though, the love triangle was a studio mandate, but at the same time, I personally don't feel as though it was there necessarily, and that Peter Jackson downplayed it.
I echo your sentiments very much as well, gentlemen, regarding the love triangle and regarding its quality. I do ultimately believe that the extended edition is the way to watch these movies and experience the story. I certainly feel it's quite a bit better than I gave it credit for initially, especially with the extra characters and plot threads woven in. I see it very much as its own thing. I very much see the Hobbit films as their own thing, separate from Lord of the Rings, while at the same time having connections to them. I don't see it as trying to emulate Lord of the Rings. I do see it as an adaptation of the events of The Hobbit. And even if the story does feel much bigger and much grander than the Hobbit book does, I do see that as keeping consistency with the world we've already come to experience through Lord of the Rings. And that is probably the hardest balance to run, trying to craft your own film series that can be recognized as its own entity, and tying it to a well-established and much-loved trilogy.
I don't think there's anything more to be said, really.
In the end, I think I do grow to love Desolation of Smaug and Unexpected Journey more over time, especially with the extended editions.
Yep, I can agree with that. I think these films, for me personally, get better on repeated viewings, especially with the extended editions.
Yeah, absolutely. I've found that myself too. I've been enjoying these two movies, and I just can't wait until we jump onto the Battle of the Five Armies and continue this, because I think it's definitely a good trilogy of films, and in no way is it any sort of major blight on the 6-film saga as a whole.
Indeed.
No, I don't like fan elitism anyway, and I think a lot of that has been levelled against these films. and that's why they don't necessarily always get the time of day that they deserve.
I very much agree, and with the extended editions being the ones that most fans and hopefully most casual audience members will find and watch, I certainly hope that the appreciation for these films increases over time rather than diminishes, like, say, perhaps the prequels were when they first came out and as they got viewed by successive audiences.
Yeah, I think that about wraps it up. And unless there's anything you two would like to add,
I think I pretty much said everything I'd like to say, as well as, and you've said a lot of things that I'd like to say as well. So I think that wraps it up for me as well.
Absolutely, guys. It's been a pleasure to do this audio commentary with you guys, and being our second foray into this Middle-earth saga that we all enjoy.
Yeah, I've been Richard.
I've been Oscar.
And I've been Rod. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.